Chapter 713. I hadn't been impulsive when I decided to go to San Antonio in the southwest to look for the necessary ingredients for leveling up. As more and more powerful individuals from other dimensions arrived, it became more and more common to see legends and semigods everywhere. I even saw several undead emperors and main gods. It was impossible for people to be so lucky all the time. I needed to level up as quickly as possible in order to live longer. But at this moment, I met with a small obstacle. "I'll go with you." Leona was quite determined, but I really didn't want her to go with me. San Antonio was now a war zone with battles going on every day. It was incredibly dangerous. What? Bardi was the same? That would be quite different. The Bardi Empire, undead armies, mage country, and wood spirits were all my allies on the surface or in private. As long as I didn't meet an undead emperor who personally came to have a chat with me, there shouldn't be any problems. As for the San Antonio war zone, the demons, the ogres, the Holy Church, the San Antonio Empire, and the Angel Squadron all seemed to want to kill me along the way. No matter what, I was confident that I could escape even if I couldn't defeat them. But if I brought Leona along, "Actually, you can wait for me in Bardi." But no matter how I tried to convince her, she wouldn't agree no matter what. It was as if I was lying to her. I felt a headache coming on. It was fine since she was only pregnant for a short period of time. But in another 5 or 6 months, would I have to travel with a pregnant belly? Many old movies always had this opening scene. A middle-aged uncle young knight escaped with a pregnant woman, but they were intercepted by pursuers. For the sake of the child's safety, the middle-aged man stopped the pursuers by himself and died in battle. This uncle was usually the child's father, uncle, or grandfather. Then, the pregnant woman successfully gave birth to the child, but she herself died. The following plot would be the child growing up and learning the truth. The child would become determined to take revenge for his mother, uncle, or father, and walk on the path of a dragon. But it seemed that the role I assigned to her was rather pitiful. The first sentence was to die. Also, wasn't this dragon the jinx of everything? His entire family died while he was still in the womb. It seems like this background and this identity really match. I sighed at the subtle death flags and the lazy scriptwriters in this world. I also made up my mind to avoid becoming the main character's stepping stone and background, for the sake of Leona and Leona's safety. 100 pounds. When he practiced his sword every day, he used a little more strength and knocked Leona unconscious. Although my swordsmanship wasn't bad, when my swordsmanship was in the lead, the difference in strength was absolute. Swift Dragon Express, signed by the Cloud Towers Truth Symposium. Delivery within 15 days. Triple payment if lost. The Blue Dragon Knight, who had descended along with the thunder, didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at me. He probably wasn't familiar with me yet and didn't know how to respond to my silly questions. Smile, just smile. In order to avoid a diplomatic dispute, the female knight did her best to squeeze out a tearful smile. However, I furrowed my eyebrows. This lass didn't seem to understand a joke at all. Name? Yours. Luna. Halent. Sensing the familiar dragon bloodline's draconic might, it seemed like it was a princess. Of course, this wasn't some express delivery. These were high-level Dragon Knight members from the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knight Squadron. After receiving my notification, they swiftly rushed over. Not only that, as requested, they were all female. "Your Highness Roland, I'll take this lady to the Cloud Tower." "Don't worry." 2 female knight with arms even thicker than my thighs immediately went to work. They tied Leona up and tossed her into a shelf on the dragon's back. I hoped that she would be in a good mood when she woke up in midair. Next up was, ogres. How ancient. I don't have enough information. The ogres had far too long of a history. They were an ancient civilization comparable to the Elven Empire. They had once been a mega-species that ruled over the entire world. Just like the current humans, the ogres had numerous main god-level existences and countless countries during their most powerful era. The entire world was their hunting grounds. Yep, hunting grounds. Unlike the human countries, which mainly focused on agriculture, the ogres were a primitive species that focused on hunting and herding. Their hunting and herding lifestyle made them the mortal enemy of all other species. In the ogres' pastures, even humans were once nothing more than powerful livestock for meat. The ogres had a tribal system. The leader of the tribe would elect the ruler of the entire ogres. They also practiced slavery. They ate other intelligent species as food, and they believed in primitive shamanism. These were the most common traits of the ogres. They even believed that eating powerful ogres would allow them to obtain the ogre's power. Although this was primitive and bloody, it was understandable. The ogre's natural talents and sorcery could indeed allow them to obtain their prey's power. Many people viewed the ogres as a single species. This was actually a misunderstanding. As the former ruling species, the ogres were actually a collection of countless subspecies. The elves had the 4 superior elf species and countless subspecies. The beastmen were divided into strong and weak subspecies based on individual combat strength. Humans had many subspecies as well. The ogres had countless subspecies to begin with. Forest ogres, grassland ogres, ice ogres, fire ogres, and so on all had vastly different physical appearances. Their natural talents were all different as well. The most obvious commonality was their protruding fangs and powerful bodies. Compared to other species, ogres had abnormally strong life force and regenerative abilities. Although ogres were called ogres, they weren't actually related to demons or devils by blood. Ogres were simply nicknames given to them by other species after they were defeated in battle. Ogres didn't have any demonic properties in their bloodline. In fact, it was the opposite. Many ogres' natural talents would be to transform into certain elemental creatures and absorb or release elemental power. This meant that ogres were inextricably connected to elemental creatures and the elemental planes. It was also due to their natural elemental bloodline, ancient history, sorcery, and witchcraft that allowed ogres to have a high number of mags. Plus, ogres had naturally powerful bodies and the special ability to replenish whatever they ate. In the immemorial generation, ogres were powerful to the point where they could easily suppress all other species. I had researched the ogres before. Humans, elves, dwarfs, and beastmen had all played a part in overthrowing the ogre's rule. It could be said that the 3 major species of order and the beastmen had allied together and gathered the power of half the elemental plane. They used a bloody war of attrition to defeat the ogres, who were inclined towards chaos. It should be mentioned that the current beastmen were also a part of the ogre's rule. They shared the same bloodline. Most of the ogre's inheritance was stolen by the beastmen, which was how the ogres came to be. The humans' undead mags and black knight, the beastmen's warlock and berserker warriors, the elves' mags and magic warriors, the dwarfs' mountain king and griffin knight. It's inconceivable that they were all in the same battle. Ogres hated humans because humans were the main fighting force against them. Undead magic was the ogre's natural enemy to ogres' priests and warlocks. Ogres hated elves because those sly, sharp-eared elves would contact other species behind the scenes and give other species power. They were the most insidious and sly manipulators behind the scenes. Ogres hated beastmen the most because traitors were always the most hated. Ogres didn't hate dwarfs that much. Ancient dwarfs were powerful enough to rival ogres in terms of combat strength. Dying to powerful warriors would be considered an honor in ogres' culture. However, dwarfs hated ogres. Elves were sly and always hid behind the scenes. Beastmen had powerful reproductive abilities and weren't afraid of losses. Humans were sly and also had powerful reproductive abilities. The dwarfs suffered the most in the ogres' war. Multiple powerful ancient dwarf species were wiped out in the ogres' war. The bloody cleansing massacre caused the children of the mountains to suffer heavy losses. Slaughtering was the most damaging to the dwarfs' inheritance. In the difficult war of attrition, the dwarfs, who were all warriors and didn't know how to retreat, were greatly weakened. The fact that the superior dwarfs were almost wiped out led to the dwarfs' internal wars. The dwarfs lost a large amount of their population and their inheritance, causing the dwarfs, who had low reproductive abilities, to gradually become a second-rate species. It was said that there were still volunteer dwarfs at the front lines in San Antonio. The ogres hated all the other species. Of the current ruling species, only the dwarfs still hated them. The short-lived species had long since forgotten about them. That year, the 4 major species successfully rebelled against the ogres. How could they possibly give the ogres a chance to make a comeback? For a relatively long period of time, the ogres' heads were equivalent to tremendous wealth. Most ogres either disappeared without a trace or completely devolved into wild beasts in the deep mountains and forests due to the cruel environment. In fact, most historians believed that the intelligent ogres were already extinct. But after the Holy War began, not only did the ogres reappear in front of everyone, even the main gods from back in the day had reappeared. There was only one explanation for this. The ogres had left behind a backup plan. Since it was already destined that their species would be replaced and eliminated, they left behind a seed to wait for a chance to rise again. And now, this was probably the final chance for the ogres. So difficult to deal with, at the beginning of the Holy War, the ogres who returned to Aishi changed their cruel ways. They were quite friendly to other species. But later, in order to allow their demon allies to come to the mortal world, the ogres tore off their fake friendliness. The existence of ogres in the Chaos Abyss had long since been recorded in history. It would seem that a large number of ogres had escaped to the Chaos Abyss back in the day. It could be said that their alliance with the demons was quite solid. And since the main gods from back in the day were still among the ogres, their inheritance and civilization hadn't been cut off. It was only natural that the ancient grudges between the ogres would continue to this day. Even though the human countries that ruled over the Chaos Abyss had long since completely forgotten about this, only the undead in the Undead Republic still clearly remembered this. In the Holy War, it would be quite difficult to determine who was right or wrong in a battle between species. The only rule of the jungle was that the victors would live, and the losers would die. I hated this rule. But as a human, I was also the one who benefited from this rule. So, whenever I thought about it, I would always feel rather conflicted. But at the very least, I wouldn't be so foolish as to say that the ogres had made a mistake and that humans should be treated as a second-rate species, to be tamed as slaves and food. And it just so happened that such a traitor really did appear in the ogres' camp. They were so stupid that it was impossible to comment on them. They were so dirty that it was impossible to look at them directly. As the main gods of the ogres revealed themselves, the ogres' originally gentle and friendly facade had long since been thrown to the winds. Right now, the eastern battlefront in San Antonio was becoming more and more like a meat grinder. Unfortunately, as I analyzed the map, I became more and more certain that the ancient ruins I wanted to find were in the ogres' current territory. Chapter 7:14. San Antonio was an ancient and powerful mega-empire, a strong candidate to become the strongest country in all of Ike. San Antonio's territory was incredibly large. It included the Beastman's home, the Golden Plains, the vast mountains in the south, and even some wetlands near a river. It could be said that San Antonio was rich in natural resources and had a large population. San Antonio's territory was far more lenient towards other species. This was because San Antonio's territory was far too vast. There were also large areas of other species, dwarfs, and gnomes at the edge of human territory. San Antonio's combat potential was astonishing. San Antonio's royalty was quite open-minded and had great strategic foresight. Unlike Bardi, Ottoman Empire, Swolo Federation, Shiluor, and other powerful countries, San Antonio preferred to use strategy to solve problems. However, compared to the elves who always ended up shooting themselves in the foot, San Antonio's diplomatic strategies were quite smooth. For example, in the Northlands, San Antonio supported the Casolan kingdom, dukedom. The Duke of Casolan was also a noble of San Antonio. This basically meant that San Antonio had built a wall to defend against the beast men in the Northlands. When San Antonio discovered that it was impossible to stop the Northlands from merging with the beast men, they directly gave up on Casolan due to pressure from other major countries. They even recalled their generals and San Antonio nobles who were still in the Northlands. In terms of strategy, this was doubtlessly the correct decision. Shrinking their defensive positions before the Holy War should be a good thing, and the beastmen in the Northlands wouldn't need to defend anymore. However, San Antonio's decision to unhesitatingly give up on the beastmen's limbs was evidence of their intelligence. At the beginning of the Holy War, San Antonio even started several wars against other countries and conquered several smaller countries. However, when the Holy War became truly dangerous, San Antonio unhesitatingly gave up on the territories of those smaller countries. San Antonio had the largest population, the largest food exporter, the strongest industrial potential, and the largest economic market. In every aspect, San Antonio was a candidate to become the world's #1 country. However, over the past few years, a certain incident greatly weakened San Antonio's national strength. Apart from civil war, what else could weaken a country faster than civil war? The previous emperor, Hant II, suddenly died. Prince Winston and Princess Maria fought for 3.5 years. In the end, there was no victor. The situation was becoming more and more severe, so they finally chose to shake hands and make peace. If I recalled correctly, San Antonio was currently divided into two major parts by the Golden Waterway and Golden Plains. The top part belonged to Prince Winston, while the bottom part belonged to Empress Maria. In name, Empress Maria was the only legitimate ruler, but her decrees were only effective in 40% of the country and 35% of the people. Prince Winston was the first prime minister of the empire, but in his territory, everyone treated him like an emperor. It was worth mentioning that Prince Winston was also the leader of the empire's Knight Order. At least 70% of the empire's Knight Order was loyal to him. Meanwhile, Queen Maria was the most powerful demon warlock in the world. Her spellcaster groups and tamed monsters were also the largest spellcaster army on the continent. Originally, the people of San Antonio hated Queen Maria for being a demon warlock. However, in the recent bloody battles, the demon empress used countless demon heads to prove that she was different from the Chaos Abyss. She used the power of the Chaos Abyss to defeat the Chaos Abyss, which was quite effective. What I found the most inconceivable was that Maria was also Ael's god envoy. That was to say, she was deeply favored by the previous death god Ael. She was even able to borrow Ael's power. This was something I couldn't understand. I had once asked the death god of the Hades about this, but I didn't receive an answer. Ael also didn't intend to introduce Maria to the Hades faction. Whenever someone asked, Maria would always smile mysteriously. It was just that Maria was now able to borrow Ael's power. It was as if she was treated like his own daughter. Privately, there were indeed some silly rumors about her being an illegitimate daughter, but nobody took them seriously. Getting back to the main topic, all of San Antonio was currently being invaded by an allied demon and ogre army. This was Queen Maria's territory. Her main enemies were the Inferno demons and fire ogres that came from the Saffron Mountains. The volcanoes there had already transformed into a sea of flames from the Chaos Abyss. Untouchable defilers and Inferno demons were born there. Since Empress Maria herself was a demon warlock who deserved to be purified, she had a terrible relationship with the Holy Church, so she didn't offer any assistance at all. The Amu Mountains were Prince Winston's territory. That place was truly the #1 meat grinder in all of Ike. The ogre's main forces were stationed there, and Chieftain Merkin also appeared there. The Holy Church had constructed a defensive line there, but the angel squadrons had been completely annihilated 3 times already. They had even lost their fortress there. With such a large background, countless knight and mercenaries would head there every day in pursuit of their dreams. Countless broken bodies and corpses would be carried off the battlefield every day. My arrival, as an ordinary human holy knight, didn't cause a single ripple at all. War? That's far away. San Antonio will definitely obtain victory in the end for the small border skirmishes. Have you heard? Her Majesty Maria and Prince Winston made a promise. Whoever obtains the greatest victory in the Holy War will become the sole ruler of this land after the war. I entered the capital city of Caden, the original capital of San Antonio. However, what I saw wasn't the chaotic scene of a battlefield. The entire capital had just woken up from the new year, and the city was filled with peace and prosperity. In fact, many San Antonio citizens were thankful that the demons and ogres had arrived. At the very least, they were able to escape from that damned internal war. San Antonio's powerful overall national strength was one of the reasons for their confidence and nonchalance. Not only that, the war had been limited to the remote mountainous regions. The major nobles and domain lords had yet to participate in the war, which also proved how confident the San Antonio citizens were. The first thing I did when I arrived in Caden was to gather all sorts of information. It wasn't that my hands were itchy, or that I wanted to become some voluntary golden-armored demon-hunting knight. It was that the maps and information I obtained from sun god Aloyo were far too ancient. The maps and coordinates were from at least several tens of thousands of years ago, which was far different from reality. I needed to search for relevant maps, history, and geography information to find the specific location. In terms of information and historical records, how could there possibly compare to the San Antonio Royal Palace? And so, I directly went to San Antonio's Royal Palace. I wanted to meet Prince Winston and see what kind of person he was. However, I didn't expect that the first person I met in San Antonio's Royal Palace would be someone I didn't expect. Prince Winston was an old man with a kind expression. However, the holy light on his forehead made it difficult for me to see his face clearly. Although I had never met him before, his face was plastered all over Ike. It was impossible for me to mistake him for someone else. The Holy Church's Pope. Pope Coloma I. Chapter 7:15. Every country's history and geography were the most important historical treasures and inheritances of that country. They were important information related to the survival of a country. Privately drawing or collecting maps was the same as committing treason. Such information was rarely seen in public libraries and nobles' libraries. Even if there was, it would be some pirated goods. High-quality books and records would usually be kept by the royal family, and wouldn't be easily loaned out. I was too lazy to make trouble for myself. In order to obtain the royal family's permission more easily, I directly used my real name to visit. Of course, I wasn't foolish enough to directly state my goal. I only said that I was here as a representative of the Mist Alliance to discuss matters related to the Holy War. Who can tell me what caused things to become like this? I was in a classical and extravagant conference hall. The ceiling was lit with expensive magical lamps, and the walls were decorated with expensive artwork. Even the servants and maids were all rarely seen handsome men and beautiful women. However, what I found rather strange was that there were currently 3 people sitting at this table. I, Prince Winston, and the Holy Church's Pope Coloma. None of the 3 were speaking. They were all smiling, but their smiles were different. Winston's smile was one of ridicule, while Coloma's smile was that of a friendly elder. I was smiling, but inwardly I was cursing. What was going on? Why did the Holy Church have to secretly visit San Antonio? And when I came here, they just had to be in the middle of a formal meeting. San Antonio was currently allied with the Holy Church. Their joint defense line was still fighting against the demons, so it was only natural that the Pope would secretly visit San Antonio. 10 minutes ago, while the 2 of them were having a conversation, an attendant hurriedly ran over to inform me of my arrival. Then, Winston didn't hesitate to say it out loud. And so, the 2 of them greeted me in front of the royal palace. Then, we sat around the table and looked at each other. Winston didn't mind, but Coloma and I felt rather awkward. From a certain standpoint, we were mortal enemies who wanted nothing more than to hack each other to death. However, on the surface, we were allies. Pope Coloma had a friendly expression, a thick beard, and narrowed eyes that made it impossible to see what he was thinking. He was a sly old fox. These were my first impressions of Pope Coloma. The 3 of us sat around each other, but none of us spoke. The atmosphere mysteriously became awkward. It was likely that even Pope Coloma wouldn't be able to communicate with Winston about the front lines in front of me. Leaking secrets was one thing, but embarrassing himself in front of the enemy was a bigger problem. If things were going smoothly at the front lines, there would be no need for Coloma to personally come to the front lines. I didn't say anything. I felt that no matter what I said, I would only bring trouble to myself. My original plan was to create an international alliance of elite combat forces when the situation of the Holy War was relatively stable. This alliance would provide support to the various battlefields that were in dire straits. This was not a temporary assumption on my part. It was a real and ongoing strategy, and had been in preparation for it for several years. I had already confirmed that the commander was Barton, who was born in a small country. He was currently studying hard at Bardi's military academy. He had even sent me a letter a few months ago. Apart from reporting on his progress, he also said that he had a second chance at life and was doing quite well. These included Bardi's Dragon Knight, the Mist Alliance's airships, the undead bone dragons, and the Ottoman Empire's battleships. These were all rather expensive elite forces. The first batch didn't have much combat strength, and their usefulness would be limited on a major battlefield. However, if they were used to support a small country, they would be a decisive force. Perhaps this still didn't count for much right now, but its significance would be quite significant. This meant that without the Holy Church acting as the middleman, we would be able to form an international alliance of countries for the very first time. This was only a seed, but it represented the possibility of non-religious international cooperation. After the Holy War ended, perhaps this would become the cornerstone of a new international order. Perhaps a system of cooperation and communication would greatly reduce the possibility of another war breaking out. Perhaps in a few decades, an organization similar to the United Nations would be born because of this. Of course, I wouldn't tell anyone about these far-off goals, which would only make others laugh at me. I was only doing a little for now. It didn't matter if I succeeded or not. Originally, Bardi and the Ottoman Empire had both agreed. Even if San Antonio didn't want to participate, it would still be necessary to inform them. This was a fairly minor diplomatic plot. Before it succeeded, it wouldn't be appropriate to announce it to the public, especially not to let the Holy Church know. The birth of a new international order would naturally be stepping on the bones of the old order. The establishment of royalty represented the decline of divine authority. From San Antonio's standpoint, it was likely that both of us were untrustworthy allies. Perhaps this pointless collision might even be able to increase San Antonio's own worth. Perhaps in Winston's eyes, my coincidental appearance was an obstacle to San Antonio's continued cooperation with the Holy Church. Winston unhesitatingly made it public, apart from the fact that my arrival was impossible to hide. Perhaps he was expressing his sincerity to the Holy Church. There were far too many suspicions in my mind, but none of them were meaningful. Being king to king didn't necessarily mean that one would be honest and direct. There were even some awkward moments where one didn't know what to say. The atmosphere in the conference room became even more tense. Everyone kept glancing at each other. It was fine to say some boring diplomatic words, but at our level, doing such things would be an insult to one's intelligence. In the end, after sitting here for half an hour, everyone drank tea and laughed at each other without saying anything. It was so boring. Of course, everyone knew that the real deal and secret investigation would probably start tonight. Finally, it was time for dinner. Before the diplomatic banquet began, I directly requested to look up some geographical information. Winston also readily agreed on the spot. Soon, I learned that Pope Coloma had brought 4 cardinals, 2 Holy Knight squadrons, and an angel squadron with him. It could be said that Pope Coloma had brought with him a grand lineup of 4 cardinals, 2 Holy Knight squadrons, and an angel squadron. It would seem that the front lines were in far too much of a pinch. Even Pope Coloma and the cardinals had personally come out to take revenge. It would seem that we'll have to grind things out. Chapter 7:16. Chaos Girl. What's that? After my usual information gathering, I actually found an interesting rumor, or rather, a rumor. The general idea was that Empress Maria was the reincarnation of some powerful demon in the Chaos Abyss, which was why she was born with an incredibly high affinity for the Chaos Abyss and became the strongest demon warlock in the world. And as long as she successfully ruled over San Antonio, there would be a demon invasion, the world would be destroyed, and so on and so forth. Nobody would believe such a rumor. Even the street peddlers believed that Prince Winston was the one who spread this rumor. After all, there had been far too many rumors about Maria being a demon's daughter and a demon conspirator in the past few years. But someone just happened to believe it. Pope Coloma I believed it. I, the most devout priest of the Holy Light, Pope Coloma I, declare that Maria is Solane, the enemy of the Holy Light. Solane is the enemy of the Holy Light. All believers of the Holy Light must purify this filthy woman. The next day, early in the morning, Such notices were posted everywhere in San Antonio's capital city. Isn't this way too unsightly? I felt rather helpless. Wasn't it already noisy enough for them to do such a thing at a time like this? San Antonio had the word holy in front of its name, which was a clear indication of its religious orientation. Most of its citizens believed in the holy light. Using divine authority to suppress royal authority was indeed a good idea. Having the Pope declare Maria a heretic would strip her of her royal authority. This would be an excellent move in a political battle. But there was still a war going on. Weren't they worried that she would really join the chaos abyss out of anger? Even if she was going to kill the donkey after it left the millstone, she should at least wait until she was done grinding the rice. She still controlled half of San Antonio, yet you didn't follow the rules at all. Demons wouldn't accept humans' surrender. But she was a demon warlock, a mage with demon blood flowing in her. She could completely transform into a demon through a demonization ritual. That would be completely impossible to deal with. If things really reached that point, and the rumors became true, that was probably what Pope Coloma and Winston were hoping for. I, the diviner of pure holy light, Estrada's successor, the strongest holy light knight in the world, Roland Hayes, declare Maria Solane, a devout believer of the holy light. So, at noon that day, I flew into the sky shamelessly. While cosplaying as an artificial sun, I roared at the audience. The Southern sect's belief in pure holy light was already widespread in this world. There was no lack of believers in San Antonio. I then wrote a letter to the Southern sect. I estimated that Maria's title of holy light would arrive in a few days. Between the two sects, one accusing someone of heresy, and the other praising someone as a pious saint, it had become a conflict of beliefs between the two religious branches. When I landed, Pope Coloma looked at me as if he wanted to eat me alive. However, I shrugged, indicating that it had nothing to do with me. I really received trustworthy information. That heretic is an extremely evil abyssal girl. It was quite amusing to see the old Pope glaring and blowing his nose in anger. I replied sincerely. I've also received reliable information. Queen Maria is indeed a devout believer of the holy light. I swear by the holy light. My pure holy light proved that I wasn't lying. According to my private information sources, this demon warlock was indeed an incredibly strange believer of the holy light. He wouldn't have come up with such an excuse if he didn't want to go against the Holy Church. Pope Coloma was so angry that he wanted to lead an army to fight me to the death. However, one of his cardinals stopped him. Pope Coloma was probably worried that he wouldn't be able to defeat me. Actually, I wasn't really afraid of a powerful holy light user. As one of the strongest holy light users in the world, I wouldn't be afraid of most holy light divine arts. If worst came to worst, I could just turn around and run away if Pope Coloma used a god's descent. No, perhaps this was a good opportunity for me. Pope Coloma, I really want to see the god of holy light's fourth incarnation. One was killed by ale, one was killed in another dimension, and one was blasted to death by a forbidden spell. TSK, TSK, TSK. You must have used up a lot of divine power. Pope Coloma was so angry that he almost had a brain hemorrhage as he watched me blaspheme a god. In the end, Pope Coloma, who would get so angry that he would start stuttering and wheezing whenever he saw me, went to the front lines as planned. I was quite happy to have some peace and quiet. Meanwhile, I had originally thought that Prince Winston would kick me out for talking about Maria. However, he actually treated me even more kindly, and even invited me to talk to him in private many times. Don't misunderstand. I really wasn't the one who spread those rumors. That Pope Coloma's unauthorized actions gave me quite a headache as well. As a soldier, I still have common sense. If I start another civil war at this time, I'll become the entire country's greatest sinner. He spoke quite sincerely, but it was fine to just listen to politicians. I had seen many more ridiculous and foolish decisions for the sake of power and benefits. Your Highness, I'm telling the truth. No matter who spread such rumors and even caused that Pope Coloma to declare Maria to be a heretic, not only is he trying to take Maria's life, he's even trying to shake the foundations of all of San Antonio. It seemed that even my overly perfunctory expression had been seen through. I hurriedly nodded. Yes, I understand. I believe you. Your expression shows that you don't believe me at all. I'm really telling the truth. Even if there's going to be a civil war, it should wait until the holy war is over. Yep, the truth. The old handsome guy was so depressed that he wanted to cry. I was actually praising his excellent acting skills in my heart. His expression and attitude were so perfect that I almost believed him. How much was the difference? The difference was probably more than 300 years. The 14-year-old me would definitely have believed him. I didn't intend to stay in the capital for long. I finished comparing the geographical information from the royal palace and confirmed the most likely locations for the ruins. Then, I immediately said goodbye and left. My only regret was that I would have to put the matter of the Allied army on hold. Judging from San Antonio's current situation, they couldn't even take care of their own matters, so there was no time to worry about anything else. However, before I left, I unexpectedly received a thank you letter and an invitation from Maria. She probably wanted me to visit her and thank me for my assistance. Of course, I wouldn't refuse such an invitation since I would be able to establish a relationship with one of San Antonio's true rulers. Even if I had to take a roundabout route, I would still go. Especially now, San Antonio was still the #1 food stockpiling country in all of Ike. Meanwhile, the Mist Alliance behind me was the #1 military weapons exporter in all of Ike. As long as we worked together, it would naturally be a great deal. What? Why didn't she try to sell them to Winston? Winston had a kingdom knight, the Holy Church's assistants, as well as Pope Casimir and Cardinal Roland's personal assistants. Why would he possibly use our weapons and equipment? It could be said that the moment that the Holy Church declared Maria to be a heretic, the enemy of an enemy had the potential to become a friend. She thus became our natural ally. However, I noticed that something was off as I traveled. The rumors about this Chaos Girl are spreading far too quickly and too widely. Chapter 717. The entire world was burning. This was the first feeling I had when I approached the battlefield. I didn't go to the Amu Mountains, as that was the Holy Church's home ground. I didn't want to die for no reason. The information on the royal palace was quite complete, but the coordinates and map that Beifong had sent me were quite mystical. I compared the old map that was several tens of thousands of years old with the new information and finally confirmed 3 possible locations. One was in Maria's territory, one was in Winston's territory, and the last one couldn't be found on the map. It seemed that the third location was in the mountains. Since I didn't want to go to the Amu Mountains to accompany Pope Coloma I, it seemed natural that I accepted Maria's invitation to go there. However, I couldn't find Maria in her temporary capital, Brunsel. I heard that she had gone to the front lines. And so, I followed her, and then saw the burning sky. The entire sky was burning fiercely. The red clouds were not a natural product. They were the result of absorbing too much fire element. Wounded soldiers were being carried off the battlefield at every moment. New warriors were joining the front lines every day. The Chaos faction here mainly consisted of fire ogres and inferno demons. If it wasn't for the fact that I had just returned from the outskirts of the fire elemental plane a few days ago, I would have thought that I had accidentally entered the wrong elemental door. The Saffron Mountains, an unknown name. This place was a famous volcanic belt in Ike. Now that all the Hell's Doors had been opened, the situation here was even worse than the Charal Autonomous Region. Fire elemental creatures were famous for having short tempers and impatience. The Charal Autonomous Region was only facing a group of individually powerful and unorganized creatures, while the demons and fire ogres here were regular armies. Fort Thoreau on the front lines was incredibly sturdy. Its thick, flowery rocks were even blessed by the power of holy. Countless corpses were piled up on the rocks, but the fort was still shaking. Meteors would occasionally fall from the sky, exploding several dozen meters away and instantly killing all ordinary creatures within the range. Judging from the trajectory of the meteors, they were all thrown from faraway volcanoes. It was unknown whether inferno demons or catapults had thrown them. Since the distance was far too great, the accuracy of the meteors wasn't very high. However, the occasional meteor would cause the city walls and the buildings within to tremble. Below the city, demons were fighting with demons. The demon warlocks on the city walls kept opening the abyssal gate. Hellhounds and low-level demons rushed out. Under the orders of their masters, they unwillingly threw away their lives. Most of the human soldiers hid behind the city walls, operating various cannons and engineered crossbows to kill the demons below. What I could see was that within my field of vision, there were close to 2 digits of level 4 semigods fighting against each other. Did we go the wrong way? This is the chasm battlefield. I had indeed seen such a high-intensity battle before, but it definitely wasn't in the mortal plane. The battlefield at the Saphiran front line was much more tragic than expected, but the news that spread out was not as tragic as the Amu Mountains. Since you're here, let's greet each other. Bring forth the wind and snow. Demon sword, Northlands. My wings of holy light dissipated in the sky. Standing in the midst of the demons attacking the city, I opened up my own battle domain. A moment ago, the fiery red clouds had disappeared without a trace. The sudden arrival of the snowstorm was about to bring fatal hailstones and snow disasters. Actually, I loved Inferno demons the most. I loved it when their elements countered each other. The Northland's snow disaster arrived. The snow instantly reduced visibility to less than 10 meters. The little Inferno demon and fire ogres didn't know what to do in the snowstorm. The extreme low temperature was stealing away their heat. For these half-fire elemental creatures, high temperature was their life. I stood in the middle of the snowstorm and casually killed any fire ogres that approached me, clearing out the area around me. Mags, there must be mags here. I didn't have the habit of revealing my identity or having my own explanation, so I directly created an igloo and buried myself in it. There's no need to rush in the snow. Let's first build an igloo to block the snow. If there were any top-level individuals or archmages here, they would naturally be able to chase after my mana source. However, these Inferno demons and fire ogres had never even seen snow in their entire lives. They would have to get used to the environment first. Judging from its design, this Northland's magic sword was meant to be used to clear out random demons. Now, let's try it out on these demons. There were still some chaotic noises outside. Occasionally, people would approach my location. However, nobody noticed that I had sealed myself in an igloo. It was likely that these people, who had never seen snow before, were panicking. Since nobody was able to find me, I directly began reinforcing the igloo. According to my experience, as long as I wasn't unlucky enough to transform into a high-speed hailstorm, this igloo should be able to last for at least half an hour. And so, I really did wait inside the igloo for half an hour. I almost fell asleep. When my shapeless magic sword finally couldn't take it anymore and naturally melted, it was completely silent outside. When I crawled out from under the snow, the previously heated battlefield had transformed into a silent land of snow. Countless corpses were buried in the snow for everyone to see. Even the outer walls of the fortress were covered in a layer of snow. My mana source was gone, and the snow was rapidly melting. Countless demon corpses appeared from the snow. They didn't have any injuries on their bodies, but they were already dead. It would seem that my experiment was quite successful. And so, I happily waved my hand at the top of the fortress wall. As a result, the semigod-level demon warlock hurriedly retreated in fright. The nearby cannoneers also nervously aimed at me. After another 10 minutes or so, under the watchful eyes of the fully armored knights and the nervous spellcasters, I finally saw the target of my trip. The strongest demon warlock in the world, Empress Maria. Since such a major incident had occurred in front of the fortress, it was only natural that she would come out to check on the situation. When I saw her face to face, I wondered if I had come to the wrong place. She had red hair, a freckled face, and was slightly chubby. Fine, she was super chubby. I was rather worried about how long the moaning wooden chair she was sitting on would be able to survive. From afar, she looked no different from a bearman who was standing upright. She was completely different from the dangerous and flirtatious death god's beloved daughter that I had expected. I almost shouted out that she was a red-haired girl with a rather unique appearance. However, her eyes were quite lively. Even though I couldn't see her chin anymore, she still seemed quite young and full of energy. She was a semigod demon warlock, and her chaos mana waves were all under her control. She didn't seem threatening at all. If it weren't for the fact that other level 4 individuals sincerely respected her, I wouldn't have believed that such a person had actually reached the peak of the world in a certain job class. Physical appearance wasn't a big deal. I was already used to all sorts of strange-looking creatures. Compared to certain existences, this girl was far more amiable and friendly. The strange thing was that even though I had never met her before, the more I looked at her, the more I felt that she looked familiar. This was especially the feeling that her chaos mana waves gave off. Still, no matter how many thoughts I had to restrain myself. I couldn't afford to be rude when it came to diplomacy. After all, the person before me was the ruler of a mega empire. Your Majesty Maria, I'm truly honored by your invitation, which is why I rushed over here. I saw that there were some unwelcome guests blocking your door, so I cleaned up a bit. Chapter 7:18. In a way, Empress Maria gave me a good feeling. At first, she politely thanked me for my help, but didn't make any requests of me, such as helping them fight on the battlefield. Our meeting ended in less than 5 minutes. The battle was still ongoing. Now was indeed not the time for a discussion. Even if we cleared out this part of the battlefield, even more fire ogres and fire demons would soon arrive. The Chaos faction didn't have any powerful individuals stronger than a certain level because there was no need for them. In a long drawn-out war of attrition, cannon fodder was the least valuable, and the Chaos faction would never have to worry about lacking cannon fodder. I didn't volunteer to help either. Apart from the fact that this had nothing to do with me, I also needed to recover some of my mana. While it would indeed be nice to use AoE spells to clear out a large area, it would take a lot more time to recover mana after each attack. The battle didn't end because of my arrival. In fact, it was quite the opposite. After a short period of silence, several powerful fire ogres came to investigate the situation, and their battle with the humans became even more intense. I was only watching from the sidelines, but I still felt quite moved. Right now, the frontline battles in the mortal plane were almost at the level of the Chaos faction's bloody battles. San Antonio's foundational strength was indeed astonishing. No matter if it was the Sky Knight fighting in midair, the mags on the city walls, or even the ordinary city guards, they were all experienced veterans. Powerful individuals who would be able to fight on their own in other battlefields were as numerous as the hairs on a cow here. There were several mags whose mana waves surpassed that of ordinary semigod mags, yet I had never even heard of their names before. Amateurs enjoyed the show, while experts understood the ropes. The battlefield here seemed chaotic, but there was actually order amidst the chaos. It was far from being at its limit. The commander had the demeanor of a commander, while the bottom-level NCOs gave military orders one level at a time. However, the most eye-catching ones were the seemingly ordinary mags. Every bit of mana was used to improve the situation on the battlefield, rather than to destroy the enemy in one go. Although this seemed petty, this was actually the core of battle mags' battle tactics. Every bit of mana was used to improve the situation on the battlefield, rather than to destroy the enemy in one go. This might seem petty, but it was actually the true core of battle mags' battle tactics. Every explosion would be textbook classic in terms of range and power. However, precise support would make it convenient for these warriors and mags to coordinate with each other. The other side of classic was that it would greatly conserve mana and spiritual energy, and could be replaced by someone else at any time. After the first wave of attacks ended, the second spellcaster took over and continued to suppress the enemy with firepower for another 10 minutes. They might not be able to annihilate the enemy, but they would always be able to receive reinforcements. I had already seen far too many people who would fight for 3 minutes and then rest for 2 hours, or fight for 10 minutes and then rest for the entire night. Fine then, I admit that the Mist Alliance's mags and teamwork on the battlefield were lacking. They weren't experienced or professional enough. The strongest country on the continent and the candidate for the strongest country on the continent might not have much of a difference in reputation, but there was an obvious difference in their foundations. They were lacking in various aspects, lacking in some traditions and small details. All of these required time to polish. At the very least, a new war mage training manual would be ready by the time I returned. By dusk, the battle situation returned to how it was before, as though nothing had happened. It was as though my actions had not been forgotten. Perhaps this was why the higher-ups on both sides had such a tacit understanding with each other. On the front line with tens of thousands of people, individual strength was far too weak. 1,000 people gathered in one place would already fill up the entire field of vision. But when the scale of the battle increased by hundreds of thousands or even millions, even if you cleared out the entire battlefield, it would soon be filled up again. 4 demons, losing thousands or tens of thousands of low-level demons was nothing at all. Not using forbidden spells wouldn't be able to change the map or the battlefield. Using forbidden spells would result in a battle to the death. From a certain standpoint, the ultimate weapons of mass destruction on the battlefield had their own troubles as well. It wasn't until nightfall that the battle finally ended. At a simple welcoming banquet, Maria quite generously welcomed me. As for business deals, she gave me a name, a chief financial officer named Solan, and had my subordinates go talk to him. Although Maria wasn't a member of the Hades faction, we had a rather friendly relationship due to her relationship with Ale. Besides, compared to Winston, who was waiting for news in the capital and commanding remotely, I liked Maria much more on the front line. The ancient sun god's ruins? At the banquet, I directly made my request. I felt that I hadn't lived long enough to patrol the battlefield and search for ruins that might or might not exist by myself. Rather than being a county official, it would be better to ask the locals first. I took out Aloyo's holy emblem and a sketch of Aloyo's eagle head. However, the final result was rather disappointing. Maria directly asked the local elders about the situation, but none of them knew anything at all. It seemed that I would have to think of a way to find the ruins myself. Since we had some free time, Maria and I naturally started chatting about the battle. She was rather interested in my new weapon, and even asked for a copy of my new weapon. However, I could tell that she wasn't very interested. She was more polite than interested. It was obvious that she was quite confident in San Antonio's traditional military strength and mags. At the very least, the current battle situation wasn't out of her control. As we chatted, we ended up talking about the demons and the chaos abyss. While I was hesitating, Maria told me about a dream that kept recurring in her mind. In the dream, she would constantly kill and be killed by others. What you think about in the day is what you dream about at night. Don't think too much about it. I wasn't interested in the sentimentality of a little girl. I had intended to casually respond, but I didn't expect to hear a familiar name. You're also a mage. You should understand how important dreams are to us. Sometimes, dreams are a mirror that connects us to a certain dimension. Sometimes, they're a prophecy that guides us in the right direction. Recently, I've been dreaming that I've been killed, but the one who died isn't me. I can't explain it. It's such a strange feeling, as if you're both the murderer and the victim. Maria was rather confused and dazed. She had asked her adopted father for help, but her adopted father told her that the man before her was an expert in the study of the soul, and that he might be able to help her. Also, for some reason, even though this was the first time she had met him, she felt that he was trustworthy. I've been having these dreams ever since I was young. Many faces have appeared as a killer. But recently, I've been dying more and more frequently. My killer, that silver-haired half-demon, is called Eliza by me. I even call her sister in my dreams and ask her why she's so cruel. Chapter 719. Back in the material world, dreams had been repeatedly mentioned and researched, but there had never been a conclusive conclusion. Why did people dream? Why did they have specific dreams? Was it related to reality? For a very long time, science was unable to explain dreams. Theology and philosophy were the only ones that could provide explanations. In fact, each of these theories even gave birth to a complete system of dream divination. Many times, dreams were viewed as a type of warning before modern technology could explain dreams as a system related to the cerebral cortex. But in Aishi, the situation was slightly different. Dreams weren't a theoretical system to begin with. After a person fell asleep, their soul would still be moving about in a daze. This pure illusion created by their consciousness was what mags called the source of dreams. Due to the existence of mind magic, dreams became a type of weakness. Casually opening one's mind and soul would be an incredibly foolish behavior. Apart from the gods, the ones who loved to influence mortals through dreams were the demons, devils, and evil gods from the chaos abyss. There was a type of dream witchcraft curse that would mark mortals with a mark. Then, evil gods and devils would wait for the mortals to fall asleep and have a heart-to-heart talk with them. Threats and temptations were actually the easiest to deal with. The most terrifying thing was to use divine power or mana to create a realistic illusion that would grind or corrode one's heart. This would subconsciously change one's personality and soul, causing the mortals to unknowingly go astray. Even the gods knew such evil spells. Those who claimed to have received a divine revelation and were received by the gods in their dreams were mostly examples of such spells. Of course, such spells consumed a lot of energy, and their effects were slow and time-consuming. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to use them. Top-level warriors would intentionally temper their willpower and seal off the windows to their souls. Mags would even more carefully protect the integrity of their souls. Only diviners and demon warlocks would treat their dreams as a type of resource. Did you recently project your soul into the chaos abyss? Top-level demon warlocks were capable of creating projections in their dreams and possessing low-level or mid-level demons or demon corpses in order to obtain knowledge from the chaos abyss. In theory, this was basically the same as the gods' incarnations in the mortal world. However, mortals could only safely have their souls leave their physical bodies while they were asleep. If the incarnation died, the losses would be tremendous. In order to protect the integrity of their own will, demon masters would create artificial demons or demon hybrids, mixing their own bloodline into them, and then tossing them into the chaos abyss as puppets. The growth of the demon-type job class couldn't be separated from the chaos abyss. Demon warlocks would either control demons or be controlled by demons. Not to mention having a normal mentality, it would already be extremely rare for a demon warlock to not be a lunatic with schizophrenia. They would either unearth their abyss devil bloodline or pour their consciousness into their abyss devil bodies to comprehend and learn everything about abyss devils. Many demon warlocks did this, and at some point, their bodies and souls had become purebred abyss devils. The greatest fear of this profession was entering the chaos abyss with one's physical body. Other job classes would be able to return after entering the chaos abyss. However, if a demon warlock entered the chaos abyss, they would immediately lose control of their bloodline due to the will of the chaos abyss. Becoming a demon warlock would also mean giving up on their mortal identity. This was an occupation that normal people could not do. After doing it for a long time, normal people would also become abnormal. When you stared at the abyss would also stare at you. The price of borrowing the power of demons to pursue power was to constantly be on guard against the abyss's gaze. Has your soul catalyst been captured by another demon boss, and is causing trouble for you through the catalyst? Maria kept shaking her head upon hearing this. Soul projection is far too dangerous. I've never used it before. High-level mags would seal off their own dreams. Only a few mage job classes would use their own dreams. It was indeed quite abnormal for the most famous demon warlock in the world to have continuous nightmares. But that has nothing to do with me. Originally, I would have confidently said this out loud. However, I was rather annoyed that she mentioned Eliza. At this moment, I more or less understood why Maria's magical wavelengths were so familiar. Her magical wavelengths were quite similar to Eliza's half-human, half-demon state. However, this only made me even more unable to understand. Something like magical wavelengths was like a person's fingerprint. Although it was related to the type of magic one learned, it was more related to a person's personal characteristics. Magic originated from the soul, so a person's personal characteristics would naturally also originate from the soul. Descendants of the divine bloodline? Descendants of the same evil god bloodline? Some evil gods would create a large number of their own descendants before they died. However, these descendants would be the equivalent of their own spare tires or replicas. These descendants would be the backup physical bodies that the evil god would use when he revived. I shook my head and rejected this possibility. Eliza had never been to San Antonio in her entire life, and Lisa was a country bumpkin. Meanwhile, Maria was a member of San Antonio's royalty. They were so far away from each other that it was almost impossible for them to be related by blood. And for evil god seeds, bloodline density was the most important factor. In the end, it would only be useful if they were directly related to each other. I went through all my current knowledge and theories, but I couldn't find any precedents that could explain this situation. Silly cat, what do you think? Nothing. I don't recall any precedents like this. Isn't soul research your specialty? Why don't you dissect her? Dissect the empress of a country who was also Aileth's adopted daughter? I wasn't that suicidal. She said that it's like her soul entering someone else's body and experiencing their life and death. That's indeed quite similar to a demon warlock's chaos abyss projection. In that case, could it be that she's a special individual? Perhaps this is also the reason why her magical wavelengths are so similar to Eliza's. I fell into deep thought as I looked at the demon warlock before me. Back in the underground world, Eliza had also been called the beloved daughter of the Chaos Abyss. It was inconceivable how much the Chaos Abyss doted on her. Since I mentioned Eliza, how about I contact her? I rummaged through my dimensional storage bag and finally took out my old communication ring. I touched it slightly, but there was only static. Then, a sound rang out, but it was a noisy noise, as if something was currently churning, and there were even sounds of explosions. Eliza, where are you? Why is it so noisy? A battlefield? You still remember to contact me? That's the voice. It's her. Eliza only got halfway through her sentence when Maria interrupted her. The next instant, the communication ring that hadn't reached its limit returned to normal. It seemed that it had been cut off. I tried to contact her again, but received no response. It's her. She's the one who repeatedly hunted us in our dreams. She calls us Chaos Girls. Maria's expression was filled with fear. Even a powerful warlock like her would have such an expression. My headache kept increasing. Wasn't this just a rumor from the Chaos Abyss? What exactly was going on here? If all of this was true, then someone was hunting these Chaos Girls. Someone was intentionally leaking the truth. Was Eliza an insider or a person involved? Why did Eliza cut off my communication? Was there something she didn't want me to know? Why did she cut off our communication the moment she heard Maria's voice? Right, Maria. Perhaps the answer wasn't far away from me. Perhaps I only needed a minor surgery. Your Majesty Maria, I have an answer to your question. Could you allow me to examine you and do a small experiment? Relax, it's been a long time since I've dissected a living person. No, what I meant was that I won't dissect you, really. Please look at my honest little eyes. Alright, even if I dissect you, I'll be able to restore you. Please believe in the confidence of a master dissector. Chapter 720. The soul was the source of everything. It was the source of all unnatural forces in the world of Aishi. Using the entire world as a template, the soul would circulate within it, and the entire world would move forward in confinement. The heaven's pillar and the river Styx had always been the core of the cycle of reincarnation. But compared to the river Styx that flowed through countless planes, the heaven's pillar, which only sent souls to the end of the world and the gods' divine kingdoms, was far inferior in every aspect. The origin of this was the difference between order and chaos. Since it was order, it naturally wouldn't change. Just the effect of transportation wouldn't be able to allow the entire cycle of reincarnation to advance. Therefore, for the world, the river Styx, which had a natural circulation effect, was much more useful than the heaven's pillar. Therefore, even the Hades plane had the river Styx. Many devout believers sacrificed everything for God. All they wanted was for their souls to return to God's kingdom after death so that they wouldn't have to go through the pain of reincarnation in the Netherworld River. However, very few people knew that the souls in a divine kingdom would also be consumed. After the souls were burned out or accidentally died, unless the gods used up their divine power to reconstruct them, the fragments would still return to the Guiming River. It was part of the natural cycle. Just transportation and migration wouldn't change. Without change, without the death of the old and the birth of the new, how could there be reincarnation? From the moment a soul fell into the river Styx, it could no longer be described as an individual. In front of the purest and most primitive power of chaos, it would gradually be broken down, damaged, and become a part of the entire Nether River. As for the soul strength of that soul when it was still alive, existences with the concept of soul strength were already incredible. But no matter how strong a soul was, in the river Styx that was the incarnation of chaos, it would gradually decompose and change, eventually turning into a member of chaos. This was the reason why the souls that climbed up to the abyss once again became demons. In reality, they were no longer individuals. If one had to describe it, the newly born demons were more like newborns born from old souls as nutrients and materials. The memories of those mortals were merely knowledge, not the past. However, there are exceptions to everything. As far as I know, there are two types of souls that won't be corrupted by the river Styx. The first was the souls of the gods. Their souls could no longer be called souls. They were mixed together with divine concepts to form a complete entity. This was especially true for the Order faction gods. Their physical bodies were combined with their divine kingdoms. It wouldn't even be appropriate to describe them as individuals. They were more like aggregates. It could be said that from the moment they ascended to the divine throne, they were no longer their past selves. Once they died, it would be like a country being wiped out. It would be a complete collapse, and those fragments, perhaps the fragments of some deity's divine spark, would become the spoils of war pursued by experts. It could be said that at the same time that they ascended to godhood, their souls had already changed. They had completely fused with their concepts, so they were naturally unable to enter the cycle of reincarnation. The seeds of the evil gods were actually using their own bloodlines to wrap their own power and soul fragments together, turning them into poisonous candies that tempted their descendants to become their own replicas step by step. It had little to do with reincarnation. The second type of soul that wouldn't be corroded by the Nether River was called Roland. I wasn't quite sure why my soul was able to resist the river Styx's corruption. In the past, I thought it was because I was a transmigrator, but now that I thought about it, the main reason was probably because of my cheat. The creator goddess created the entire world. She was the highest level existence. The goddesses of chaos and order respectively controlled chaos and were second-level existences. The power of order transformed into the pillar of heaven that connected the order gods' divine kingdoms and the upper planes. The power of chaos transformed into the river Styx that flowed through countless planes. My research concluded that life and souls originated from the meeting between chaos and order. In that case, life and souls were both lower-level concepts to chaos and order. Any life that encountered the river Styx would naturally be directly disintegrated. This was the suppression of a higher-level concept over a lower-level concept. It was the foundational step of order that was written into the world. When I was tied together with a certain master of order, even though she no longer had much power, she was still an individual who wielded control over order. She was even stronger than the river Styx, which represented chaos. In that case, a lower-level concept would naturally be unable to harm a higher-level existence. Since my soul was possessed by my system, I was naturally able to happily sing on the river Styx. However, I wasn't at a completely higher level than the river Styx. Death and the river Styx would still make me pay an equal price. Only I would be the one to pay for these losses, not Astria. From a certain standpoint, I came to a despairing conclusion. Based on this conclusion, even if I killed off the two creator goddesses of chaos, it would still be quite difficult to completely destroy their souls with just the power of this world. No wonder they would wander around the world like wandering ghosts looking for trouble. In that case, it was no wonder that Cavendish had risked his life to go to the Hades in order to get rid of the remnant soul in his body. I suddenly came to a strange conclusion. It was likely that there had been an undying Roland before. Perhaps there had also been an undying Cavendish. It was just that nobody knew how many times Cavendish had died on his path of growth. But now that he had gotten rid of Cynthia's remnant soul, he had probably lost his undying nature as well. Under Astria's guidance, I successfully analyzed Maria's soul. The conclusion I came to was rather inconceivable. A chaos girl. How is this possible? But now, I discovered a third type of soul that was even more powerful than the river Styx. Although I still needed to analyze the specific characteristics of this soul, there was no mistaking its level. This is a remnant of Cynthia's soul. What did she do? No, she's not Cynthia. This is a brand new individual. However, it's impossible for us to reincarnate. No, alright then, it was impossible for her to be mistaken. This was the first time I had ever seen such a large emotional fluctuation. My system seemed rather anxious. I habitually ignored my system, which was panicking for once, as I carefully thought through all the clues. What did Cynthia do? I really wanted to know the answer as well, but it was likely that the person who knew the answer wouldn't tell me. I fell into deep thought as I looked at the gigantic creature lying on the operating table. Should I dissect it a bit deeper? However, I was afraid that I would be unable to restore it. How many years will you be sentenced to for murdering the empress of the strongest country in Ike? I'm waiting online. It's urgent. I could only sigh and give up on this rather tempting option as I said such a silly joke. Being unable to restore it was one thing. What I was most afraid of was that I wouldn't be able to analyze her soul shards even after dissecting her. Just like how the river Styx's power level was lower than mine, my power level was definitely lower than this soul shard's. Without my system's assistance, it would be impossible for me to successfully dissect Maria's soul. And, my system was currently half-crippled. It wouldn't matter much if I made some purely logical guesses. An evil god seed. The term sister and the strange direct connection between them, as well as the fact that they would kill each other, all reminded me of an evil god's seed. Evil gods' children would also kill each other in order to steal each other's divine power and power in order to become more complete. In the end, they would lose their sense of self and become the evil god's resurrection. In that case, were these chaos girls also killing each other in order to steal each other's power and become more complete? Could it be that Cynthia would be the one to be resurrected in the end? This was quite possible, especially since we had previously witnessed Cynthia's backup physical body during the Battle of the Hades. In that case, since she had a backup physical body, wouldn't she also have a backup soul? That's impossible. It's impossible for our souls to be duplicated. There's no material in this world that can contain our souls. It's impossible to create an artificially created soul duplicate. Alright then, this possibility was negated. Although it's impossible to duplicate a soul, it's possible to split it up into countless shards. I can pretty much guess what Cynthia is doing. Give me some time. I need to figure this out. It's best if you can find me 2 more Chaos Girls to compare. 2? Where should I find them? Perhaps they're not far from you. I've already memorized their soul fluctuations. Your sister-in-law, Leona, and also Eliza. Eliza, that's impossible. Back in the day, Lisa was just an ordinary person, a pure ordinary person. How could she possibly be ordinary with such a soul? Are you certain? I'm certain. Are you certain that it was after you fished her out of the river Styx? I was rendered speechless as my past memories flashed in my mind. Originally, Eliza's magic power and martial arts talent had been terrible. However, Eliza, who had been born from Lisa's mother body, had excellent magic power and martial arts talent. Not only that, she was deeply favored by the Chaos Abyss. This woman before me is also greatly favored by the Chaos Abyss. There's also Leona. From a certain standpoint, the Chaos Abyss is also favoring her. Chapter 721. The original Cynthia has already perished. Not only that, this happened countless years ago. Astria's tone was quite confident, but her emotions were incredibly complex. Perhaps she never expected that her sister who had fought against her for half her life had already perished. Thanks to her analysis, I was now able to see how the Chaos Girls worked. What was the foundational nature of chaos? It was evolution. In that case, if evolution always had a pinnacle that couldn't be surpassed no matter what meaning would there be in evolution? And so, as a pure chaos main god, Cynthia was more vicious than anyone else. She gave up on her sense of self and transformed into pure chaos. Every single Chaos Girl was Cynthia, but also not Cynthia. After becoming a Chaos Girl, the Chaos Girl would only have a single soul shard of Cynthia's. that soul shard would still be an independent entity. And that soul shard would be the entrance ticket to a grand banquet. A banquet of mutual slaughter would be the entrance ticket to the highest level of existence. The loser would lose everything, while the winner would obtain everything from the loser. These soul shards were originally of the same origin, and they desired each other to become even more complete. At a certain point in time, the winner who obtained the most soul shards would become the new Cynthia with all of her sister's power and memories. And the moment that Cynthia ascended to godhood, she would become the true Chaos Goddess. She would become the true highest existence along with the Chaos Goddess memories and power. The highest existence. The highest existence for only 1 or 2,000 years. Won't she still be disintegrated before the next holy war? In Cynthia's eyes, an old lion king being bitten and chased away by a young lion king is a scene worth watching over and over again. How should I say this? Both sisters had gone to extremes. Pure order was eternal imprisonment and prohibition. Pure chaos was limitless chaos. This time, things are slightly different. But this time, things are slightly different. Astria and I simultaneously thought of a problem. It was highly likely that the final winner of this Chaos Girl competition wouldn't be able to become the complete Cynthia. The final winner would only be the mortal who devoured the most Cynthia soul shards. She would still need to merge with the will of the Chaos Abyss and obtain the Chaos Goddess past accumulations in order to become the Chaos Goddess Cynthia. The will of the Abyss is in Cavendish's hands. The previous generation's conflict between Cynthia and Astria gave birth to me and Cavendish, 2 children of the Abyss. Cavendish wasn't lying. In terms of karma and bloodline, it wouldn't be wrong to say that Cynthia was our mother. However, the will of the Chaos Abyss had been controlling Cavendish all this time. However, Cavendish was defeated in the Battle of the Hades and dragged away by Cavendish right in front of us. Perhaps it was just a memory and knowledge that did not have enough self-awareness and wisdom, but it was the crown of the goddess of chaos. Without its important part, it would be impossible for the soul fragment to go from quantitative to qualitative change and become the true soul of the goddess of chaos. It was likely that every time a sufficiently powerful Chaos Girl appeared, the will of the Chaos Abyss would come looking for them. But for some people, this is indeed a good thing. You only need to kill to obtain all of the enemy's memories and power. You'll be able to instantly reach such a level, and you won't even need to bear the responsibility of being the Chaos Abyss's ruler. Where else can you find such a good thing? Losing the crown would mean that the Chaos Girls would lose their restraints. In that case, there would be no time collapse bomb. This time, the Chaos Girls would be the last of the Chaos Girls, but they would also definitely be the strongest. It's highly likely that in history, the truly intelligent Chaos Girls would avoid the fate of becoming one with the Chaos Abyss in order to avoid the final misfortune. This time, it's likely that the ancient Chaos Girls will take action as well. That's because the victor will no longer have any restraints. It's impossible for the victor to spare the Chaos Girls. My back was drenched in cold sweat as I carefully thought about this. Not all seeds sown would germinate. That was because the intelligent seeds would be afraid of being harvested. However, the harvesting farmer would be gone this time. Not only would all the seeds germinate, they would also furiously absorb the nutrients they needed to survive, even if that meant taking away other people's living space. Without restraints, nobody would be able to guarantee that they wouldn't end up as food for others. Nobody would be able to live in fear. In that case, the easiest way to ensure safety would be to become the sole survivor and stand at the top of the food chain. Just like the insanity of the last holy war, this battle without the Chaos Goddess crown would be destined to be a battle to the death. Lisa isn't a Chaos Girl. Eliza is a Chaos Girl. There's only one possibility. While she was drifting in the river Styx, the will of the Chaos Abyss placed a soul fragment into her soul fragment. But how did Eliza know that I would come here to take her soul? She doesn't need to know. She only needs to watch Maria enter the cycle of reincarnation. She's already sown seeds everywhere to begin with. There's no need to think too much about it. Maria had probably never met any other Chaos Girls before. Her instinct to fight still hadn't awakened yet. This instinct was engraved deep within her soul fragment. At some point in time, Maria would instantly awaken whenever she saw any other Chaos girls. If Maria had already awakened her instinct and understood everything, then there would be no need for me to investigate her. Judging from the rumors that accused her of being a Chaos girl, someone wanted her dead. Perhaps it was another Chaos girl who was behind all this. She had already been exposed. Leona was also a Chaos girl. Cavendish, who had taken away the will of the Chaos Abyss, definitely knew something. He also intended to do something about it. Cavendish had always been nice to his women. Could it be that he favored Leona and believed that she would be the final victor? I didn't know when Eliza had awakened, but it was evident that she had already made her decision. She intended to become the final victor at all costs. Now that the truth was right in front of me, a problem that gave me an even greater headache appeared. Should I tell Maria about this? Go ahead. She'll soon find out. At the very least, it's certain that someone wants to kill her. What do you think will happen if she mysteriously dies? The silly cat had remained silent all this time, but she suddenly interjected at this moment. If Maria died, then so be it. What did that have to do with me? I paused in surprise. But then, I was unable to sit still anymore. If Maria truly died, no matter who killed her, the first suspect would be Prince Winston. Just like how I didn't believe that the rumors were spread by someone else, Prince Winston wouldn't be able to defend himself. Maria was still single. She had no descendants. There were only two possibilities for her death. The first was that the royal faction's power had completely collapsed. Winston, who had taken advantage of the situation, would laugh his head off. This was highly unlikely. The second was a civil war, a complete and utter battle to the death. The ministers in despair want to take revenge. But since they're facing enemies on both sides, it's a civil war with no victor. It's impossible for there to be a victor. As long as the ogres and demons work harder, the strongest country in Ike will instantly collapse. The entire world will be shaken, and the balance of the holy war will tilt once again. This matter had nothing to do with me, so I let it go. The silly cat could see everything clearly, but my heart was in chaos. Her Majesty Maria was assassinated. Her Majesty Maria. Catch the murderer. The murderer. Heavens, what should we do? A loud noise came from outside the window, causing the entire fortress city to go into a frenzy. Maria's mana source was rapidly disappearing in the distance. Even the silly cat was unable to remain calm. It's over. San Antonio is finished. A knight who had been scared away outside the window spoke out my inner thoughts. It's over. San Antonio is truly finished. Chapter 722. It was Roland. The undying Roland killed her. Someone saw it. It was that person. If I had only been surprised because it had nothing to do with me, then I was completely astonished. Me? What kind of joke is this? Before I could respond, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps outside my residence. Dark magic was already gathering, indicating that a powerful mage was making preparations. Damn it. Now wasn't the time to think too much. If I really was caught red-handed, those furious mags wouldn't listen to my explanation. Damn it, I've been tricked so badly this time. Even if it was me, I also wanted to curse a few times at this time. Not long after I arrived, Maria was assassinated. Who would be able to so easily kill the strongest demon warlock in the world and make everyone believe that I was the one who did it? Cavendish, you brat, you tricked me again. At this time, my first reaction was that I had been tricked yet again. Perhaps I had also been targeted by him while I was searching for him. Perhaps he was the one who personally set up Maria's trap. But now wasn't the time to explain. It would be impossible to explain. I unhesitatingly jumped onto the windowsill, spread my wings, and directly flew up. While I was still flying up, sword energy and magic spells came rushing towards me, along with flying demons and gargoyles that were being controlled. I looked down and saw that even in the middle of the night, countless torches were lit, and there were people everywhere. The entire city was burning, and many areas were in chaos. The guards below me had the deepest hatred in their eyes. Between the dark clouds in the sky, mags and aerial knight were constantly rushing over from the distance. Since they were innocent, why did they have to wait for the truth to be revealed? In this world, There was still the concept of torture into confessing and kill first and report later. Explain. If I stopped right now and was even half a second slower, I would be beaten into meat paste. Their eyes were bloodshot with hatred. It was impossible for them to listen to any explanation. It would seem that Maria had been killed in front of everyone, and they were now convinced that I was the murderer. I shook my head and flew higher again. At the very least, I was confident that I could escape before they surrounded me. Damn it, this is probably only the beginning. This was a land of wind and sand. The wind and sand covered the sky, and the violent hurricane brought about a deadly sandstorm. Everything was shrouded in fog. They had already passed the Saffron Mountains and were in a deserted, uninhabited area. As far as the eye could see, there was only sand and sand dunes. As I continued digging and calculating the coordinates, I was getting closer and closer to my destination. It had been 2 weeks since Maria was assassinated. After leaving the chaotic fortress city, I headed towards the mountainous region without hesitation. My ability to fly allowed me to avoid all of San Antonio's cities. I knew that the only way to avoid such a large country like San Antonio would be to avoid their spies by not coming into contact with humans at all. My journey here was rather relaxing. I had gotten used to hunting and camping by myself. As for explaining anything, I had already contacted the Mist Alliance's diplomatic channels. In my explanation, I said that the assassin wasn't me, but someone in disguise. As for whether they believe me or not, it would depend on what they plan to do next. Actually, what I was most afraid of was that they would believe my explanation and admit that I wasn't the assassin. If they didn't intend to start a civil war and accept Prince Winston as their ally, then I would be the best scapegoat. The Mist Alliance was thousands of kilometers away, so it would be impossible for them to declare war. This way, the Mist Alliance's officials could take this opportunity to give the commoners an explanation. At most, they could curse at me from afar, but it wouldn't hurt the Mist Alliance at all. At most, they would send some assassins to kill me and then put up a bounty for me. With my many years of experience in being hunted down, there wouldn't be much of a difference. After all, I had already been a public enemy of Ike before. As long as I didn't come to San Antonio in the future, there wouldn't be much of a difference. At most, I would have another group of enemies and pursuers. As for the top-level gods, Cavendish's acting wouldn't be able to fool them. I didn't need to worry that Ale would misunderstand. If Maria's officials believed my explanation, or at least said that they approved of it on the surface, then it would be quite troublesome. It wasn't the Mist Alliance or Roland's actions equals it was an assassination attempt by someone else equals who benefited from Maria's death equals Prince Winston was the mastermind equals civil war. Also, it was no secret that I had previously stayed at Prince Winston's residence. This would be a great deal of trouble if it was revealed. Roland was the assassin equals he had no conflict of interest with Maria. There was a mastermind equals Prince Winston was the mastermind equals civil war. No matter how I look at it, the situation doesn't look good. I returned from a sandstorm. I was nearing the end of my exploration of the ruins. Today was also the day that I would meet up with the Mist Alliance's intelligence agent. However, I didn't see anyone when I arrived. There was only a package that was buried in the sand. I opened the package. As expected, it was a file box with a self-destructing magical lock. The key to open the lock was my magic signature. I infused my magic into the box and opened it. It was a stack of the newest Fairies daily newspaper and some edited text. Duke Barot has declared war against Prince Winston. He and his 12 subordinate earls have formed the Vengeance Knight Order, swearing to take revenge for Queen Maria. This was the shocking title that was placed on the surface. As I continued reading, I discovered that the situation was far worse than I had expected. On that day, Maria had been assassinated in front of Prince Winston at a banquet in the public square. Many of the participants had been elite commoners and merchants. The assassin was Roland, who had returned after saying goodbye. Together with him were a cardinal and 2 holy temple knight. It would seem that Roland had come to introduce these honored guests who had come uninvited. Marie Adam naturally wouldn't be rude and directly met with them in the public square. And, the assassination just happened to take place right when Maria was meeting with the diplomatic group. Roland wasn't the only one who had attacked. The diplomatic group had also attacked. Although the two Holy Temple Knight Barot were directly torn to shreds by Maria's final counterattack, and the Cardinal was also torn to shreds by the enraged crowd, Roland had indeed escaped. He had even run in the direction of my temporary residence. The framing was quite successful. It was later verified that the assassin had indeed been an envoy sent by Prince Winston and the Pope. Cardinal Rost was an incredibly famous diplomat, but he had been torn to shreds by a group of commoners in the chaos. All the assassins had died. The only one who had managed to escape was Roland. But actually, I had an alibi. After I returned to my residence, I ate dinner in the main hall, played a game of Quentin, and even cheated to win some money. Only then did I leisurely return to my room with a midnight snack. After that, I talked to the customer service staff and ordered 2 roast chickens to feed my cat. This was completely different from the time when Roland had appeared. I didn't believe that such a huge point of suspicion wouldn't be discovered after everyone calmed down. Not only that, but that Cardinal Rost was a ruthless character at the level of a cardinal. For him to be torn to shreds by the enraged mob was obviously suspicious as well. However, if the current development was what Duke Barot wanted to see, he would naturally be able to ignore all suspicions. A knight who swore to take revenge for his former master finally defeated an evil schemer and gained control of this country. Finally, with the bloodline of his former master gone, and under the repeated requests of his subordinates, he had no choice but to ascend to the throne and be crowned king. This was an old story, but it was tempting. The confusion was real. As expected, the chaos had only just begun. Chapter 723. The best schemes didn't need to be flawless and flawless. All a scheme needed to do was to do the correct thing at the critical moment, and then everything would go according to plan. San Antonio is in chaos. Even a child or a passerby could come to this conclusion. The original Maria faction directly retracted its territory and gave up on a large portion of its territory, opening up a path to San Antonio's most precious treasure, the Golden Plains, the #1 food producer in all of Ike. Duke Barot gave the order to retract his defenses. In just a short half a month, he mysteriously reached an agreement with the demons in the Safalan Mountains, and the frontlines stopped fighting. Currently, his faction was furiously recruiting troops for war. However, this time, his opponents might not be the other species. Meanwhile, Prince Winston was probably so worried that he couldn't sleep at night since he was facing 2 major battlefronts. The Holy Church, which was his backup, was also getting serious. It was said that not only did the Holy Church send 2 Holy Knight squadrons, they even sent 2 true gods. The goddess of mercy, Wendy, and the goddess of wheat, harvest, Fiend. Although they were both the weakest of the new gods, they had sent their true bodies as true gods. One of them had ascended to godhood for 120 years, while the other had ascended to godhood for 95 years. Both of them were follower gods of the Holy Light faction. The fairies' evaluation of them was that they were level 5 level 4 existences who had just reached the standard of a low god's true body. However, 10 years ago in the mortal plane, they would definitely be undefeatable existences. Now, it was difficult to say. The descent of true gods also meant that the war was on an even higher level. It was no longer a battle between mortals, but now it was a battle between true gods. Although high-level combat strength had appeared in the Elven Kingdom before, that was an old custom of the Demon Wave. This time, it was said that the Chaos faction had used top-level combat strength first, breaking the unwritten rules. A top-level combat strength had appeared in an assassination attempt. Now, the fairies were spreading the news everywhere that the true assassin was Abyss Prince Cavendish. Apart from Duke Barot, who was the victim of the assassination, most other factions also accepted this explanation. After all, in the eyes of those in power, Roland had already done many things in this holy war. The existence of the Mist Alliance also determined his position. Perhaps this was an explanation that most human kingdoms would be willing to accept. After all, the Mist Alliance was becoming more and more important. In this regard, the Bardi Empire, the Mage Country, and the Ottoman Empire had done the most. They had supported my innocence on all sorts of occasions, praising me to the point where I couldn't even recognize myself. I was rather moved, But I also knew that this was because they were becoming more and more connected to the Mist Alliance. Such an explanation would be beneficial to them. Unfortunately, the bystanders could see everything clearly, but the parties involved could not. One side pretended not to see anything, while the other side could not explain clearly. Information on Duke Barot was also unearthed. Barot Cass, the current head of the Cass family with more than 500 years of history. He was also a very powerful demon warlock. He used to be Maria's staunch supporter and suitor. When I saw this situation, I also felt that this bro's taste was quite unique. In any case, it was nothing more than the same old trick: the king, the marquis, the general, and the emperor's position would be occupied by someone else. Looks like San Antonio is going to be in chaos. I carefully thought things over and calculated the resources I had available to me. In the end, I gave up on trying to interfere. San Antonio was faintly the most powerful country in all of Ike. Tall trees attracted the wind. Even if the sky collapsed, the tallest would hold it up. Now that the world was in chaos, it was only natural that San Antonio would be the first to suffer. The previous emperor's sudden death, and the infighting between the princess who used the power of the Chaos Abyss and the princes who represented the traditional knight rank had already left the seeds of discord. This wasn't an accidental conflict between individuals. This was a result of San Antonio's national situation. San Antonio's territory was vast and had abundant resources. However, this also required sufficient strength to protect it. In this generation, communication was slow, so the authority to command the military was only left to the local commanders. If a message was sent from the capital, 2 months might have passed by the time the message reached the border. It would be impossible to blindly command the troops from the capital. That was why San Antonio's knight rank was quite pure. They were quite pure in their loyalty to the princes at the border. Someone would need to command the troops at the border anyways. San Antonio's various border fortresses were the princes' fiefdoms. In the current generation, there were a total of 12 princes in San Antonio. Most of them were the second sons of the royalty or the children of concubines. Later, they had their own fiefdoms at the border, which lasted until now. It was easy to get a new prince, but it would be difficult to have one less prince. Nobility's inheritance system was the foundational foundation of feudal society. Why should the prince's descendants give up their father's fiefdoms? Over the past few years, the royalty had also noticed this problem. They had stopped giving new princes, but it was already too late. The knight rank required military achievements to be a pure professional soldier. And if they wanted to make achievements at the border, they needed to curry favor with the princes instead of the royalty in the capital. As time passed, the royalty naturally had a rift between the royalty and the princes who held actual power at the border. However, this country was large and stable enough. The royalty had always been careful in dealing with this, so there had never been any major problems. At the very least, since the princes kept each other in check, and the royalty itself was the strongest nobility in the country, nobody would be foolish enough to take the lead before the royalty went too far. But in the last few generations, the royalty's population had been low, and the princes were all tempted. By the time of the previous emperor, the royalty was barely able to keep up. However, the princes were already getting restless. According to the nobility's rules, once the direct bloodline was cut off, the princes would naturally find a successor from the side branches. And so, almost 2 months before the old emperor suddenly died, Maria's only younger brother also died in an accident. Winston was the leader of the princes' faction, as well as the representative of the entire knight rank and the nobility. The princess represented supreme royal authority. Naturally, all those who were loyal to the royal authority would unite by her side. However, for the sake of strengthening the royal authority, Maria suppressed her ambitious uncles and uncles, doing many things for the sake of strengthening the royal authority. By her side were mags, knights with military achievements who were commoners, peddlers of small goods, and even evil mags and demon warlocks who were viewed as dangerous. As long as they were loyal to the royal authority, she wouldn't be picky about anyone's background. The new factions and the traditional factions were naturally incompatible. It would only be a matter of time before they fought each other. And the old emperor's sudden death was the fuse for this civil war. Previously, the Holy War had only barely managed to make peace between the two factions. Now that Maria was dead, this meant that the foundation for a peaceful civil war had been completely destroyed. Once the flag of revenge for the new emperor fell, the reformists would lose their so-called righteousness. As citizens of San Antonio, they would have to obey the new royalty. Perhaps righteousness sounded illusory, but it would affect everyone's heart. The reformists had been forcefully gathered by Maria to begin with, so they would soon fall apart. However, it was obvious that the reformists who had finally changed their fate weren't willing to accept such a fate. On one side, the reformists would be punished and sent to the gallows, while on the other side, the reformists would be the country's founding heroes. The truth had already proven what should be decided. Barot was still preparing for war. I didn't know when the civil war would begin, but I knew the day it would end. That day would be when both sides bled to the bone, the cities would be reduced to rubble, and everyone from commoners to ambitious schemers would suffer heavy losses. Only when they were no longer able to accept the pain of war would they be able to sit at the negotiating table. Duke Barrett's alliance with the Chaos faction made the truth even more mysterious. Everything was shrouded in mystery. Nobody knew how many schemes were involved in all of this. However, a tall tree would attract the wind. San Antonio's current situation was likely the result of the combined efforts of all the major factions. Perhaps the major human countries weren't in a hurry to prevent San Antonio from falling apart. Instead, they were busy having a celebratory party. San Antonio can't be saved anymore. Chapter 724. Originally, I didn't want to care about how other countries fought, nor did I have the ability to. However, the chaos in San Antonio would definitely have a far-reaching effect. At the very least, I, who was searching for ruins in the desert, would have a lot of trouble because of this. I had already found the ruins in the records. It was in a desert surrounded by sand dunes. I randomly dug a large hole and forcefully found the ancient ruins that were buried underground. However, I soon discovered that I had found the wrong place. The Snake God's ruins. Although I wrote many random things to earn money, I wasn't skilled at archaeology. However, the ruins before me didn't require much archaeology knowledge. The most valuable things in ancient ruins would be tombs or temples. They would often contain many precious treasures and magical items. Tomb robbers, adventurers would be able to easily find their target by using magic detection techniques. It seems that I didn't find anything this time. However, this time, I saw that the murals were filled with snake-headed creatures, as well as various voodoo pots, scarecrows, wooden spears, and other miscellaneous items. I knew that I had found the wrong place even though I didn't need to investigate further. I also faintly sensed that some magical items hadn't been taken away. If this was in the past, I would have been quite interested in exploring temples. After all, many god equipment, mystical treasures, and ancient magic spells had been excavated in such a manner. Tomb robbers, exploring ruins would always be the most profitable business. However, exploring ruins required sufficient patience and limitless time. I didn't have either of these. There were so many troublesome matters in the mortal plane right now. I didn't have the leisure to waste time here. Since I had already confirmed that this ruin wasn't the sun god's territory, it was highly likely that the remaining ruin was the sun god's territory. Traveling half of San Antonio at this point in time, just thinking about it gave me a headache. I also had the title of the most wanted criminal on the planet. Although some people wouldn't take it seriously, the low-level knight and guards would take it seriously. It would be quite troublesome if my identity was exposed. However, there were some things that had to be done. The world was becoming more and more chaotic. It was likely that the gods would descend upon the mortal plane soon. If I couldn't achieve a breakthrough as soon as possible, it seemed that I had many enemies among the gods. I had offended more than one or two gods during the Yongyea era. If the gods truly descended upon the world, I won't become the first mortal to be raided by the gods. That would probably be enough to leave my name in history. But I'd rather not have such honor. I had offended many gods back then. Since it was impossible for them to descend with their true bodies, and their incarnations couldn't do anything to me, I had offended all of them. Destroying their mortal churches was the same as destroying their faith. They were amazing if they hadn't perished yet. To the gods, it would be even more than killing them. As for which ones were my enemies, I really couldn't remember. Who would remember how many true gods priests I had killed when I was sweeping through the undead faction? I didn't even know how many true gods priests I had killed. I. No matter how he thought about it, he could only hide in his shell for a period of time. At the very least, before he obtained a few magic swords, it would be unwise for him to fight to the death with a god-ranked character. As I could I was, would I to. Back in the day, I sacrificed everything in order to reincarnate. If I couldn't become even stronger, wouldn't that be foolish of me? Theoretically speaking, as long as I had a single magic sword, I would at least be able to protect myself against a god. If I could create the most dangerous magic sword, it probably wouldn't be too difficult for me to kill a god. Let's go. I put on a cape, used my age-deceiving accessories, put on a fake beard, and put on tattered chain mail. This time, I chose to disguise myself as a middle-aged, impoverished adventurer. Middle-aged adventurers would always be the majority of adventurers. As long as I was a bit careful, I doubted that I would be exposed. I was also immune to most detection magic, so I didn't need to worry about being ambushed. Now that I thought about it, if it wasn't for the fact that I had exposed my location to Prince Winston, it would have been impossible for Prince Winston to figure out my location. However, I felt a headache whenever I thought about the long and arduous journey back to San Antonio. It wasn't that I didn't want to ride a flying mount and fly in the sky. That would be equivalent to walking for a week in the sky. However, San Antonio was no small country. There were all sorts of aerial mounts patrolling the area. It would be quite fun to be surrounded by them. My journey out of the desert was quite smooth. I only spent one day walking and flying. However, the rest of the journey would obviously be much more difficult. I felt even more depressed when I thought about how it was likely that I wouldn't be able to enter any cities along the way. Just like on the way here, I really wanted to fly there. On the way here, I took the risk of sneaking into a city and communicating with an information broker. However, the information I obtained was even more depressing. At the very least, in most of San Antonio's regions, I would forever be labeled as a suspect. The most ridiculous and displeasing part was that I was actually connected to the Holy Church. All sorts of information seemed to be accusing the Holy Church of causing all of this chaos. Prince Winston was the Holy Church's lackey, and I was the Holy Church's killer. I could understand that political propaganda was mostly nonsense. However, it was quite difficult for the Holy Church's propagandists to make it this far. The Holy Church's mortal enemy, Roland, was actually working together with the Holy Church in order to assassinate a certain empress who was thousands of kilometers away. How ridiculous would it be for anyone to believe such ridiculous rumors? Whenever I went to a city, I would see my face plastered all over the bounty boards and city gates. I could only helplessly reduce my desire to go in and out of the city. I found a general store and replenished my water and unpalatable rations before continuing on my way. I considered whether or not I should join a merchant's caravan or an adventurer's team. It would be much more discreet than traveling by myself. However, when I considered how slow ordinary people were, I could only helplessly travel by myself. Everywhere I went, I could see heavily trained militias and knights patrolling everywhere. The shadow of civil war seemed to be looming over San Antonio's country. When I almost reached Prince Winston's territory and got close to the Taro River, I received a certain piece of news. The civil war had already begun 1 day ago. Duke Barrett's cavalry regiment had attacked the border city of Tardin under the cover of night and killed off all who resisted. It would be difficult to even find a name for this fortress city, and it had less than 2,000 soldiers stationed here. However, this city attracted the attention of all living beings, including the gods. That was because this operation could only mean one thing: San Antonio's civil war had erupted. What was even more inconceivable was that ogres and inferno demons had appeared among Duke Barrett's cavalry. Former mortal enemies had actually become allies. Thinking about how Maria had also died in the hands of the demons, if her spirit was still in the underworld, she would probably explode in anger. I checked my map and discovered that Tardin was actually quite close to my current location. After hesitating for a moment, I decided to take a detour. Unfortunately, I was slightly too late this time. My pursuers had already arrived. Chapter 725. His fiery wings were burning fiercely on his back. A tall two-handed greatsword was also burning with holy fire. There was also a faint halo of light behind his back. Such an image could be likened to a god statue. He was more than 4 meters tall, but he didn't look fat. His body was fit and beautiful, and his huge body was covered in golden armor. His solemn face was filled with dignity and justice, and his sword-like eyebrows and big eyes were burning with hatred for evil. However, this angel was definitely no ceremonial soldier. His great sword, the great bow on his back, and the tower shield weren't just decorations. Such a rare creature was at the top of the food chain in both melee and long-range combat. A 6-winged battle angel was no different from a moving fortress. The second-ranked scorching sky god envoy was in charge of judgment and punishment. According to what I knew, there were less than 100 of them in the entire world. They were all kept as honor guards by various gods, and they wouldn't be easily sent out. Why did this image seem so familiar? Or to use a more common term, he was the number 1 fighter below the gods, a scorching angel. Your Highness Roland, Lord Coloma wishes to meet with you. Please come with me. However, it wasn't the demons chasing after me. Instead, it was the Holy Church's angel squadron. His deep voice resonated with me. This was the natural holy voice of a high-level angel. Those with weak wills wouldn't be able to resist his natural charm. Of course, the scorching angel didn't expect me to be moved by his words. Although he was using the word invitation, his tone seemed to be filled with doubt and respect, as if it was only natural for me to do as I said. You're using such a method to invite me? It wasn't just a single scorching angel who came to me. There were a total of 11 4-winged mid-level angels floating in the sky. Some were armed with bows and arrows, while others were wielding staffs. They faintly surrounded me. Dragons used their body size to indicate their power level, while angels used their wings to indicate their power level. 2-winged low-level angels, 4-winged mid-level angels, and special-winged high-level angels. The angel squadrons that had previously entered the mortal plane had all been the lowest-level angels. Their individual power levels were all above gold rank. Meanwhile, 4-winged mid-level angels had at least saint rank combat strength. It was even possible for them to be semigod rank. As for the superior angels, they were born with transcendent combat power. The most powerful of them were capable of clashing head-on with gods. They were truly a powerful race capable of playing an important role in divine wars. Seraphim were also famous for being able to fight among the superior angels, and each of the few Seraphim divine servants had their own title. Highness Vinton. My name is Vinton, the war hammer of my master's right arm. The rhythm of his speech was like a devout prayer. His voice naturally had a holy tone to it, but I couldn't hear any emotional fluctuations in his voice. The Hammer of Glory, Vinton Angola, was a god envoy directly under the god of holy light. Obviously, this was not a friendly invitation. Did Prince Winston and the Pope think that handing over the real murderer who killed Maria would end the civil war? No, in terms of holy light, the glorious hammer was probably even higher than the Pope. Had the god of holy light finally lost his patience? He wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of me as soon as possible. The angel's encirclement tightened slightly. Although the distance of a few steps was meaningless to us, they were using their actions to emphasize their presence. As long as I had any intention of escaping, they would immediately attack. Oh no, I have something urgent to do right now. Next time, halfway through his sentence, a spear of light suddenly appeared in front of me, indicating the angel's attitude. It would seem that there was no way to resolve this peacefully. However, I actually smiled happily. This wasn't a forced smile or a trick. It was a genuine delight from the bottom of my heart. Finally, I had obtained this opportunity. Did you know? What's the thing I hate the most in the world? Hating negative emotions like this isn't good. As a user of holy light, you should learn to control your own emotions. Vinton's voice was still calm, but it was as if he was a lecturer lecturing the truth. He was an emotionless angel looking down on mortals. In their culture, emotions were superfluous to begin with. As for me, the first thing I hate is idiots who think they're better than others. My favorite thing to do is to break their arrogant noses. The second thing I hate are idiots who have no opinions of their own and only know how to blindly follow others. Scamming and toying with them makes me truly happy. The third thing I hate are all sorts of birdmen. Just looking at them makes me itch all over. It's quite rare to see all three of you together. My words didn't contain much emotion. My deepest hatred didn't need to be shouted out. I simply wanted to remember him, find an opportunity, and then kill him. On the Ottoman plains, an angel army slaughtered true devout believers of the Holy Light. Estrada's followers were crushed by the angel army, and even Estrada died there. A holy knight and holy light priest who worshipped the Holy Light had actually died at the hands of an angel army sent by the god of Holy Light who worshipped the Holy Light. How ridiculous and tragic was this? Yes, I knew that the angels were nothing more than the god of Holy Light's tools. They were nothing more than slaughter puppets with no will of their own. But since that was the case, I might as well use these puppets to collect some interest. Since a sword with a soul was being commanded by its master to kill on its own, then breaking the sword wouldn't count as a mistake, would it? My death magic domain expanded as dark magic spread out. The original sin demon god incarnation that I hadn't used for a long time was activated. The power of holy light was basically a buff to angels. My half-baked power of ice was limited in damage to angels, and my power of law was basically useless against the sinless. My skin began to distort. My scales and magic wings were both symbols of demons. The next instant, the angel army unhesitatingly started attacking since they had already received the order to directly kill Estrada if they couldn't capture him. I laughed as my death shadow began dancing its own dance. Despair, 7 sins of creation sword. Countless wailing black shadows gradually appeared in my shadow. These were the despairing souls that I had collected from the demon wave. The black shadows transformed into living humans. A hole opened up in the world as black humanoid figures that resembled black mud poured out from within. Perhaps this magic sword was the least complete of all the 7 sins of creation sword, but it was definitely the most powerful. This was especially true against the various gods and creatures from the heavens. If Dawn's holy light sword's enemies were demons and undead, then this 7 sins of creation sword's natural enemies would be the order gods and angels. The soul had always been the main theme of my death magic. Meanwhile, emotions were the key to unlocking the secrets of the soul. The entire sky was polluted. White clouds turned into dark clouds, and the wind carried a pungent smell. The fertile soil was instantly dyed black and rotted. The ordinary land became a plain of death. And this was only the aftermath of this magic sword's concept being taken out. Chapter 726. What is a soul? Everyone had their own opinions, but none of them were close to the truth. This was because there was no standard answer to this question from the very beginning. The goddess of creation did not have a blueprint from the beginning. It was a self-evolution of the soul. It was just that the researchers analyzed it from different angles. In the east of Earth, there was a saying that there were 3 souls and 7 spirits. The 3 souls of heaven, earth, and human, carried completely different functions. They were the human's self-awareness, human's sense of propriety, justice, and shame, and human's lifespan. According to my understanding, self-awareness, values, and the lifespan of the soul are the basic hardware that makes up a soul. Under certain conditions, these are also fixed. The 7 spirits were the dead dog, the crouching arrow, the sparrow, the thief, the non-poison, the defilement, and the smelly lung, which referred to happiness, anger, sorrow, fear, love, evil, and desire. In other words, they referred to the most primitive emotions and instincts. Don't you find it familiar? Actually, the 7 deadly sins of the West are the same. At most, there are some differences in the specific emotions. It's just that the angle of differentiation is slightly different. When it came to human nature, No one was better than the other. It was just that in another sense, different paths led to the same destination. The starting point of my research was the foundational structure of the soul. The division between hardware and software was the foundation of everything. The 3 spiritual souls were hardware that were fixed in a short period of time. However, the 7 physical souls were the embodiment of a person's emotions. They were changeable and forever changing. 1 second, they could be extremely happy, but the next second, they could burst into tears. In my opinion, whether or not an AI had feelings was the most fundamental difference between humans and non-humans. No matter how fast an AI's calculations were, it wasn't a living thing. The so-called random calculations were just a trick to deceive people. It would never be able to compare to feelings that came from the heart. In the scientific world, the study of the soul could only rely on guesses, but in Aishi, there were traces to follow. That key was the emotions represented by the 7 spirits. The art of fear, which made people scream in fear, was the favorite of necromancers. It was a special use of negative energy. There were many divine spells that made people happy and calm. Holy light instinctively made people feel warm and at ease. Rage, berserk energy, the soul of rage burning in the blood, the berserker had the ability to tear everything apart. Charm and aphrodisiac abilities were the favorites of certain classes and succubi from the lower planes. Some of these abilities were strong, some were weak, some were rare, and some were commonplace, but they all touched upon the depths of the soul, the black box that no one could reach, the part that represented the 7 souls and 7 deadly sins. Injecting a certain frequency of magic power or certain energy would trigger a certain emotional reaction. Perhaps, from a certain perspective, the human soul was also an interesting thing like computer programming. Thus, after a long period of research, I gradually analyzed the soul fluctuations represented by the various emotions. How does the power of transcendence affect the soul? How to adjust the supernatural power? How to decrease the influence? Which part of the soul are they affecting? Which part of the 3 souls and 7 spirits? Could he split a part of his emotions? Was that the legendary soul detachment syndrome? The result of my research was that I divided a normal soul into many pieces and successfully separated the areas of pure emotions, artificially creating the purest and most single-minded stubborn soul. Yes, the 7 deadly sins. Of course, it wasn't that simple. The birth of every single soul of original sin required at least 1,000 times the amount of soul essence. This included a portion of my own soul essence. The power of the 7 deadly sins lay in the uniqueness of the soul, the purity of the soul, and the extremity of the soul. Only those who loved would be saints. Only those who hated would go insane. Only those who desired would be incurable. Any soul that reached the extremity would be impossible to be ordinary. In terms of quality, the souls of every single soul of the 7 deadly sins were at least 1,000 times more powerful than that of an ordinary mortal. And in terms of soul quality, there was no foundational difference between a semigod and a normal mortal. And for Aishi, the soul was the source of his power. 4 undead creatures, as long as their physical bodies weren't too weak, they wouldn't possibly be weak. And this is only a part of the results of my research, the knowledge of soul creation. In that case, doctors who were the best at saving lives would naturally know how to kill faster. With creation came destruction. Mastering the essence of creating souls would naturally mean mastering how to completely destroy a soul. 7 sins of creation soared. Countless vengeful souls crawled out of my shadow, forcefully transforming the entire plains into a living hell. I was able to take away a portion of a soul. In that case, what would happen if I added a portion to an originally healthy soul? What would happen if I added one of the 3 spiritual souls and 7 physical souls? From a certain standpoint, this was indeed an interesting proposition. And so, I did some interesting experiments. Boom! The 4-winged angel that the vengeful souls collided with instantly exploded into blood and minced meat. There were no magic waves, no battle, no sound. A powerful angel that had lived for nearly 1,000 years was gone just like that. Beside me, countless resentful souls walked out. Some of them died of despair, some of them died of hunger, some of them died of lust, some of them died of anger, and after I processed them, those pure emotions became all of them. They were all souls of pure original sin. They instinctively desired to be complete. They instinctively desired to return to the cycle of reincarnation and instinctively became a part of another soul. This wasn't an attack. This was a blessing. This was the soul's instinct. They were just like soul shards in the river Styx. They were currently merging together and becoming more complete. When I raised my head and laughed out loud, countless dark souls spilled out from under my feet. The entire world became a haunted house. The powerful battle angels weren't even worth mentioning in front of these weak, vengeful souls. The moment they came into contact with them, they would either be as unmoving as a mountain with their physical bodies intact but their souls destroyed. Alternatively, their souls and physical bodies would both become distorted and instantly explode. If the river Styx was the acid that could dissolve all souls, then these simple souls would be the glue for souls. Attack these vengeful souls. They weren't even undead. They were pure living beings. Holy light should give souls peace and blessing. How was I supposed to attack them? Demon. In the sky, the roaring seraphim swung his sword down. His lightning-like sword intent was tearing through space itself. I was unable to dodge at all. But why should I dodge? The burning holy light sword was already touching my face. The glorious hammer, Vinton Angola, had an expression of disbelief as he stopped. Countless vengeful souls crawled out of his body. Veins popped up on his furious face. It would seem that even angels now had emotions. How does it feel to have your soul restored? It must be nice to experience anger and despair for the first time, right? You should be thanking me for allowing a toy like you to have emotions, right? It was a pity that my words were meaningless. The seraphim couldn't hear me anymore. The god-killing battle angel was still in the same posture as when he swung his sword to slay demons. However, he was no longer able to move, because the soul within him had been completely destroyed. I picked up my cloak and activated my shadow again. This time, I began collecting these vengeful souls. These were all materials for my sword. I had gathered them with great difficulty, so I couldn't waste them. Sigh, what a waste. On one hand, I sighed at the waste of these simple souls. These 3 minutes of explosive power had wasted more than 20,000 vengeful souls. On the other hand, it was a pity that all the angel souls had been destroyed. I was unable to retrieve such high-quality souls. I resumed my journey. This time, only a few god statues of angels remained behind me. Perhaps they would stand here for a very long time. 3 days later, the calamity rankings were updated. For the first time, a certain person entered the top 3. This time, his titles weren't some ambiguous undying Roland. Instead, he was titled Soul Dominator and Undead Emperor. Chapter 727. The tigers on the mountain haven't eaten humans for a long time, and you think it's time for you to become vegetarians? Young man, this old dog still has some teeth. Being ambushed and killed by the Holy Church was within my expectations. As long as the Holy Church was powerful, and as long as their superior god-level combat strength could enter the world, it would be only natural for them to eliminate an unstable factor like me. In that case, I would either find a hole to hide in, or I would cut off the filthy hands that reached over and tell them to act within their means. You want to kill me? Sure, as long as you pay a sufficient price. My 7 Evils magic sword should be able to calm down these ordinary order gods for a period of time. So far, apart from the Blade of Law which was still in the blueprint stage, the design concepts and functions of my magic swords had all been revealed. I had also decided on my own combat style. The very first would be the Ice Magic Sword Northlands. It would create a death arena where only enemies and I would fight in a restricted area in the snow, which I was most skilled at. And within the restricted area, the Dawn Holy Sword would be effective. Not only would it increase my combat strength, but it would also continuously weaken chaos creatures. It would be as shameless as tying vampires to the sun. And if the opponent was undead or demons, the Dawn Holy Sword would also have powerful killing abilities. But just this alone wouldn't be enough. Holy swords were meaningless to the Order gods, angels, mortals, and other creatures of Order. However, I still chose to create them. That was because in my design concepts, There was a powerful killing weapon that only had souls and could easily slay even gods, the Seven Evils magic sword. The seven evils of the Seven Evils magic sword were the seven major negative emotions that humans viewed as the original sins. This was proof that the higher planes viewed the lower planes as imperfect creatures. The god of holy light, who had already transformed into an automaton, and the angels, who were pure killing machines, were the most extreme in this aspect. Since you view the negative emotions of mortals as sins, then this sword made purely of the negative emotions of mortal souls should be called the Seven Evils magic sword. There was no need to explain the theory behind this sword. It was made from a tremendous number of souls. According to my calculations and basic design, it probably didn't need several tens of thousands of souls, but millions or even tens of millions of souls. Not only that, the more pitiful the death and the deeper the souls were, the better the effects would be. No matter how one looked at it, even in the entire history of necromancy, this magic sword could be considered as the most evil creation. Once the molding was successful, anyone who was hit, as long as it had a soul, would be instantly destroyed by the massive amount of negative emotions. A body without a soul would be meaningless. The design concept has already been proven to be feasible. The only thing I've been complaining about is the lack of materials. Ever since I created the blueprints for the Chaos Abyss, I had been complaining about my lack of materials. I had even considered going to the undead planes to rob them. Unfortunately, undead that had lived for far too long didn't have that many negative emotions. The souls of the living that had just died were still the most useful. If I was forced into a corner, I even had the thought of looking for the inventor of necromancy, the demon archduke. If it wasn't for the matter with the elves, I might have already succeeded. I searched everywhere, but was unable to find all of them. In fact, I couldn't even find a fraction of them. However, the Battle of the Elves gave me an unexpected harvest. From a certain standpoint, I had personally benefited the most from the elves' destruction. I had destroyed the demon wave with a single forbidden spell on the battlefield. Even I didn't know how many souls I had managed to collect in the end. Not only that, the soul shards of the elven gods, especially the soul flower that a main god had shattered at the very last moment, were all precious treasures that would be impossible to collect under normal circumstances. The soul shards of these god-level existences not only greatly improved the quality of the materials, but the elven gods' curses and grudges before their deaths also accidentally infected my magic sword with the curse of godfall, giving it additional offensive power against the gods. This made me decide to begin molding my magic sword. The core of my magic sword, Seven Evils, was the soul shard of the elf main god Anslo. The process of molding my magic sword was slowly progressing in the shadows. I didn't take out my Seven Evils sword, which was still in the process of being molded, when faced with the attack of the angel army. I simply opened up the opening where my magic sword was stored, allowing the materials to come out by themselves. If I had really taken out my magic sword, which was still in the process of being molded, then we could take a look at what happened to the small countries that revealed that they were researching nuclear weapons, as well as what the status of the main gods would be after they invented nuclear weapons. The effect is even better than I expected. In a way, this was also a test. Pure creatures of order would obey the heavens' orders. They would be emotionless as their honor and virtue. Their souls would also be quite special, exquisite, and balanced. Just a few powerful negative souls were already enough to make them unable to withstand it. That seraphim could be considered a main god in the upper planes, but even he wasn't able to last for long. And the seraphim wasn't even the true enemy of this magic sword. That's right, it was likely that some people had already guessed that this magic sword's true enemy was the order god. The order gods were combined with their own divine concepts. From a certain standpoint, they were existences without any sense of self. They would need to fulfill their divine concepts and expand their own concepts. The concepts represented by divine concepts would greatly increase, and the gods would become even more powerful. For example, the god of war during war, the god of wisdom during the Renaissance, the god of rain or the god of the sea during a downpour. Their divine kingdoms would be their own domains. Their divine bodies would be the combination of their souls and divine concepts. They would be concepts with their own consciousness. And if too much of their self was poured into them, they would probably die in a worse way than seraphim. Theoretically speaking, if their divine bodies were struck by this magic sword, their originally ordered divine bodies would naturally be filled with many impurities, which would cause them to lose their internal balance. The gods didn't have individual souls, so the destruction of their entire divine body would be an unsalvageable destruction. The god-slaying sword Seven Evils was the true name of this magic sword that I still couldn't say out loud. As for when it would take form, that would depend on when enough people died. Perhaps I should go sightseeing on the battlefield more often. The Golden Dawn Holy Sword purified chaos into order. It was the slayer of demons and undead, the purifier of chaos. The black magic sword Seven Evils poured chaos into order. It was the slayer of angels and gods, the destroyer of order. Theoretically speaking, as long as I completed these two magic swords, I wouldn't be at too much of a disadvantage against any opponent. Unfortunately, no matter which magic sword it was, it would be far too difficult to deal with. Perhaps I should go to the battlefield when I have the time. The death of the Hammer of Glory, Vinton Angola, caused a huge uproar in the entire world. The Holy Church, which had originally been in high morale with the arrival of reinforcements, instantly went silent as if someone had hit them with a club. This was understandable. Vinton Angola was a legendary character from the legends, the god of holy light's right-hand angel. Every day, people would hear about how powerful he was, how he eliminated evil, and how he killed powerful magical beasts. Everyone wanted nothing more than to accomplish those legendary feats together with him. However, this undefeatable god of war had mysteriously died in a small alley right after arriving. Not only that, he had been killed while trying to kill someone else, and his opponent wasn't even a god. Not only was this unacceptable, but it also made people wonder if they had been scammed before. Perhaps their backer wasn't as strong as they had expected. Even someone who had been bragged about as an undefeatable god of war was so weak. Perhaps it was time for them to consider a path of retreat. The cardinals of the Holy Church were no idiots. They did their best to keep this information under wraps. Unfortunately, others weren't idiots either. They wouldn't let go of such a good opportunity to damage the Holy Church's reputation, especially the fairies, who were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the Holy Church. On the afternoon of the second day after Vinton Angola's death, posters that were printed at the last minute were everywhere. Based on the fairies' style, although the title's Vinton Angola, who felt that he had a great advantage, was killed by a mortal and tragedy. Someone announced that he loved to eat roasted angel wings were as eye-catching as ever. The content of the posters was as detailed and realistic as ever. How the angel army blocked Roland's path, how the angels felt that they had a great advantage, and then swarmed him, only to instantly kill him was described in a very realistic manner. In fact, even the time it took for the battle to end was recorded. The title of 3-Second Man would probably make the venerable Vinton Angola so angry that he would come back to life. Of course, there were also illustrations of the battle. Vinton Angola, who seemed as strong and powerful as a mythical hero, stood next to those piles of flesh. However, his eyes were empty, and his powerful physical body had become nothing more than an empty shell. How did Roland accomplish this? How did he succeed with such an attack method? If Vinton Angola came to assassinate a certain politician, would that person be able to escape? What sort of attack method could destroy an enemy without harming the physical body? Not to mention, the enemy was an angel, a powerful species with the highest magic resistance in the entire world. Of course, Roland wouldn't give an explanation. Only an idiot would do something so foolish as to show off his special abilities so that others could find flaws in them. When this battle report was tossed onto the desks of every country's politician and king, only then did everyone recall that Roland Mist was not only a major arms dealer and diplomat who was skilled at international negotiations and private deals, he had even challenged the entire world by himself and almost defeated a mega-dangerous individual. And then, the calamity rankings were updated, and Roland was now ranked third on the list. The person ranked second was an old acquaintance of mine, Chaos War God Donates. During the Demon Wave, countless individuals had died directly or indirectly to Donates. And, the person ranked first on the calamity rankings was still that existence whose name shouldn't even be mentioned. By the way, if Donates was even more dangerous than a Chaos main god, he must have long since been undefeatable. It was likely that before news of him leaving the world of Aishi spread, his #1 position on the calamity rankings wouldn't change. As for me, after the news spread out, the people around me became much cleaner. At the very least, any faction or organization that had any intentions of attacking me would now measure their own resources and see if they could truly deal with me, and if they could afford to take my revenge. And, if I wanted to express goodwill to other factions in the future, it would have much more weight. This was just how realistic the world was. No matter how famous one was or how amazing one's past was, it wouldn't compare to having actual combat achievements right in front of one's eyes. Perhaps many people felt that after my revival, I was actually much weaker than I was in my Lich form. It was likely that all their previous information analysis was now useless. Another benefit was that I no longer had to hide my whereabouts. I could openly enter cities, stay in inns, or go to restaurants. Nobody would stop me. Even the Holy Church, which was involved in all this, fell into an abnormal silence. Perhaps they never expected that even though they had sent out their ace, they would be completely annihilated without even causing a ripple. Unless they sent out the true body of a mid or powerful god, I really wouldn't be afraid of them. It was just that I felt rather pained to lose the materials for my magic swords. But since I had already revealed my true identity as the Undead Emperor, I no longer avoided anything. I directly traveled through the battlefields of the Holy Church's internal war, driving my ghost carriage through the battlefields and taking away the pitiful souls who died due to the internal war. It wasn't that no level 4 individuals noticed me, but since I had no intention of interfering with the battle, most of them pretended that they didn't see anything. Perhaps my reputation was somewhat tarnished, but I regretted not being able to see anything. Now that I no longer needed to completely abandon my disguise and hide from people, I could even travel through battlefields of my own volition, which greatly increased my speed. In less than a week, I took the opportunity to arrive at the Amu Mountains. However, this place was different from the previous internal war. The two sides fighting here were demons, ogres, and humans. It would be far too difficult for anyone to pretend that they didn't see me. This time, I should be able to make a mistake. After eliminating all the wrong targets, of course I would be able to find the correct target. Although my luck in the lottery was rather frustrating, at the very least, I had obtained the final material for my magic swords. It was now before me for me to truly become a level 4 individual. Chapter 728. In this pitch-black cave, apart from the sound of water dripping, there was only the sound of footsteps. Asterisk swoosh. Asterisk the addition of alchemical accelerant caused the torch's light to become even brighter, allowing me to clearly see the decorations around me. The crude cave obviously wasn't the official entrance. It was a vast area as far as the eye could see. The rock wall above me was more than 100 meters tall, and a series of grey palaces stretched as far as I could see. Grey brick stairs formed a path between the palaces. Under the palace complex, there were small brick bungalows, but now all that was left of them were broken brick walls. This place should have once been the ruins of some civilization, but it was obvious that it had been robbed more than once. Apart from the stone statues that couldn't be moved, the robbers didn't leave anything behind. The golden skin and gems on the statues had all been dug out. Perhaps it was because the craftsmanship wasn't good enough, or perhaps it was too ancient, but the murals on the walls were all grey and black. Even the parchment scrolls were so rotten that they were unrecognizable. Did I miss again? The silly cat's words caused my heart to tighten. If I really did encounter a target that was stolen by a robber, then it would truly be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Let's ask the gatekeeper first. Skeletons walked out from the ruins. Most of them were dressed like grave robbers, but there were also some skeletons with bird heads. Undead. I actually heaved a sigh of relief when I saw the enemy. The most common type of undead in ruins were all sorts of undead. As far as I could see, most of the undead here were skeleton type. There were low-level skeleton soldiers, commoner version, skeleton archers, and skeleton laborers. However, the highest level undead here were probably only a few skeleton mags. There were no liches here. The existence of these undead here meant that this ruin hadn't been repeatedly cleaned out yet. There should still be valuable items here. Even if there were high-level undead here, they wouldn't be intelligent existences. After all, even the solitary liches would occasionally want to go out for a stroll. It would be acceptable for them to stay underground for several hundred years, but several thousand years or tens of thousands of years would be too much. Many people believed that the older the undead were, the stronger they would be. In a way, this was a misconception. Generally speaking, the more intelligent the undead were, the less likely they were to be weak. TSK, they're already eroded. Don't break them too much before I extract their memories. The negative energy of the skeleton soldiers in front of him was starting to dissipate. Their bones were about to turn into fossils. Some of them even fell apart on their own as they walked. What kind of combat strength did they have left? It wasn't that the longer the undead lived, the stronger they would become. It was that only the powerful undead could live for so long. Low-level unintelligent undead that had been alone for a long time would gradually weaken as their negative energy dissipated, and they might even return to dust. If the negative energy density in that area was very high, it was also possible for a new undead to appear in a pile of corpses and broken bones, which was completely different from a natural undead. Only the intelligent undead would consciously gather more negative energy, gradually becoming stronger, more cunning, and more solitary. The skeletal creatures in front of them gave off the feeling that a gust of wind would blow them to the ground. Perhaps the enclosed environment here gave them enough protection. These undead guards could bully grave robbers who didn't have much power, but they were useless against a necromancer like me. A few low-level enslaved undead went down and seized control of these masterless undead. I directly extracted the memories from the skeleton soldiers' soul fragments, but I furrowed my eyebrows. The oldest undead here are less than 1,000 years old. They crawled out from the remains of this place. At the time, this place was already in ruins. Later, the Earth's crust shifted, making it even harder to find the entrance. There aren't any treasures here, so nobody ever comes here. I would rather have an undead bone dragon block my way than encounter such a situation. If I searched bit by bit, who knew how long it would take? It was even possible that I wouldn't find anything in the end. I was even more unwilling to just turn around and leave like this. I smell the scent of the living. Who dares to disturb the glorious Grimcard's slumber? I suddenly heard an angry roar from the palace. This was a secret conversation between souls, something only high-level undead were capable of. Judging from the mana fluctuations and the dragon's tone, it seemed to be a bone dragon. Soon, a ghost dragon flew out from the palace. Although it was only a small dragon that was less than 5 meters long, its voice reached me before it even arrived. So the jinx is still useful. 2 minutes later, the ghost dragon that had been baring its fangs and claws earlier was now clutching its head and lying on the ground. At my friendly request, it enthusiastically explained the situation around it to me. Mirror. Something that shines. Something that can reflect the light of other objects. This small ghost dragon didn't even seem to know what a mirror was. However, with my enthusiastic help, it soon recalled something. I think I saw it a long time ago, but I couldn't bite it, so I casually threw it away. I don't know where it is now, but it should be here. I couldn't even be bothered to get angry at the ghost dragon's foolish expression. It would be quite difficult to extract memories that even the ghost dragon couldn't remember. I had no intention of slowly searching through several hundred years of this ghost dragon's memories. In that case, this dragon is still useful. At the very least, it means that it's sturdy enough and doesn't fear torture. In that case, all of you, get moving. Find it even if you have to dig 3 feet underground. One skeleton soldier after another stood up from the ground and picked up their hoes, knives, and forks as they began their treasure hunt. I was worried that we wouldn't have enough people, so I even summoned an additional group of undead to help with the search. As a veteran tomb robber, adventurer, it wasn't like I hadn't experienced exploring ruins before. Treasures wouldn't be placed in treasure chests for you to open like in games, nor would they naturally drop when you killed some monster. Judging from the intense magical waves, it was obvious that these treasures were good items. They were most likely cursed items or traps. Nobody would casually bring their entire treasure trove around. Even monsters with low intelligence would have plenty of disguises and traps in their treasure troves. Without a good eye for appraising treasures, Even a valuable antique would be treated as scrap metal. I had already seen a dozen amateurs who would treat shiny, gold-plated swords as if they were treasures. In those legendary stories, the lucky ones who picked up god equipment from grocery stores were usually idiots who treated the god equipment as scrap metal and sold it off. Although this was 99% likely to be a scam used by unscrupulous merchants to scam newcomers, there were indeed a few precedents. After all, not every adventurer's team would bring along a veteran appraiser. Some goods were obtained through illegal means, especially when it came to tomb robbers who robbed nobles' tombs. They would be satisfied if they could get their goods out safely. It was quite common for them to sell their goods at a low price. In that case, you've picked up leftovers before? Bought something good at a low price? The silly cat was rather astonished. No, I've seen others pick up leftovers before. For example, Cavendish, Adam. I felt more and more that the world was unfair. Why was it that these low-intelligence creatures always succeeded in picking up leftovers? Even though I repeatedly appraised and inspected items, I never found any treasure, so that's why I opened my own shop in Sulphur Mountain City, specializing in selling unappraised stolen goods and antiques picked up from underground tombs. I sold them for 500 silver coins each. At first, business was quite good. You're still able to maintain a long-term supply of those random items. You must have arranged for someone to win them, right? My antique craftsmanship was quite good, and I also had all the random items my system gave me. Heloise shook her head. She had also guessed what had happened after that. You were exposed later, so you couldn't continue your business? No, although I indeed couldn't continue my business afterwards, that wasn't the reason. Then what was it? You felt that it was boring? I was careless and made a mistake. I really sold a god equipment for 500 silver coins. I lost so much that I cried, so I couldn't continue my business anymore. With your personality, you actually couldn't think of a way to get it back. Oh, I get it. Don't tell me that the one who bought it was Adam. I nodded heavily. This incident had left a shadow in my heart. I had lost at least 10 years' worth of business. I would never open my shop again. I chatted with Heloise from time to pass the time. The low-level undead were helping me search for the mirror, but I really didn't know how long it would take for them to find it. Reflective shards, hard stones. These were the crude orders I gave these low-level undead. They were so complex that they couldn't understand them. Some skeleton soldiers were already holding strangely shaped stones in front of me. It would seem that I would have to look for them for a long time. 1 year. Half a year. But the god of luck actually favored me just once. After the broken stones piled up into a small mountain in front of me, a skeleton worker who was almost rotting brought me the magic mirror in less than a week. Chapter 729. What about the sun god's magic mirror? As a former top-level god equipment, it didn't really matter to me whether or not it had many wondrous uses. That was because it was only one piece of the puzzle. What I needed was its material and effects. The main material for my Dawn Holy Light sword was based on my design. Apart from all the random supplementary materials, the most important material was one main material and 2 functional components. The quality of their materials would directly affect the final power level of my sword. Back in the Chaos Abyss, when the Devil Lords were constantly pressuring me, I forcefully created this sword. The main materials I chose were Roland's spear and Estrada's battle hammer, which the god of Holy Light had used when he was still an ordinary person. Dawn was a holy equipment that represented the day of Holy Light's descent. It represented the origin of Holy Light, and had the highest level of symbolism in a religion. That was why Dawn was the highest level Holy Light equipment. The latter was a Holy Knight's inheritance. It was the symbol of the Holy Light's protection for humanity for thousands of years. As the main material, this Dawn Holy Light sword had an unbreakable tenacity. It had the most important tenacity and hardness of any weapon. Also, it was the best combination for Holy Light. Not just one main material was good enough. Myth-ranked weapons were usually made from rare treasures or special items. The design didn't have any specific requirements on the material to begin with. There were only requirements on the material's abilities. It would be fine as long as the design's functionality was met. As for the last two functional components, one was used to scatter light and purify pure holy light, just like a lighthouse. The other was used to gather light and use highly focused holy light to kill enemies, just like a laser. Originally, I had intended to use these two components to complete these two functions. However, sun god Aloyo gave me a great gift. The concept of the sun itself was a light source that scattered light. Meanwhile, a mirror was a magician of light. Depending on the shape, design, and angle, a mirror would either gather or scatter light. When the two met, my two functional needs were satisfied at the same time. My Dawn Holy Light sword disintegrated in midair. Aloyo's mirror transformed into liquid mercury and merged with my Dawn Holy Light sword. While creating the sword, I sat down cross-legged and meditated. Holy light shone down from my Dawn Holy Light sword. I bathed in holy light. Stepping into the demigod stage wasn't just a matter of crafting an epic weapon. Creating a myth-ranked weapon was only a method. The powerful characteristics and combat strength were only secondary. His true goal was to use a myth-ranked weapon as an extension and supplement for his physical body, making up for the natural deficiencies of humans, elves, and other humanoid creatures. Humans were like a cup. The path of growth would be filled with water. By the time one reached the myth rank, the cup would already be full. The limitations of one's race would limit one's development. In that case, one would either have to change to a larger vessel, which would be equivalent to changing one's race and physical body. This would be equivalent to starting all over again. Alternatively, a small opening would be made on the side of the cup, allowing the water to flow out and be stored in a backup container. This was the foundational theory for myth-ranked weapons to achieve breakthroughs. The Great Tao was the simplest. It sounded easy, but it was harder than ascending to the heavens. This is equivalent to making up for your innate defects. That new myth-ranked weapon would need to be a part of you. That way, you wouldn't waste the buff. Also, you couldn't take too small of a step. Otherwise, it wouldn't be effective, and it would be meaningless. This was the equivalent of having an additional functional organ grow out of a human's physical body. Using this as an opportunity, you broke through the limits that the creator goddess had set for you. This was also the origin of the names semigod and level surpassers. Once you took this step, you would no longer be an ordinary person. You would surpass your limits and become undying. That's right, semigod's lifespan would be greatly increased. Even if you didn't make any preparations to extend your lifespan would still be increased by several times. As long as you weren't in a hurry to die, you wouldn't need to worry about your lifespan. However, in order to develop a new path, just strengthening your myth-ranked weapon wouldn't be enough. During this process, your physical body would also need to evolve and change in order to adapt to the new organ. Only then would you be able to evolve both your physical body and your myth-ranked weapon. It could be said that this step was the most important step, as well as the most difficult step. How well you took this step would directly affect your future development limits. Some people would waste several hundred years at the myth rank in order to take the final step well. In the end, either you didn't have enough resources, or there was a problem with your design, so you were still barely able to take the final step. Some people wouldn't even reach the myth rank for several hundred years before breaking through to the myth rank and achieving amazing results. Some people would bitterly struggle for several hundred years before finally breaking through to the myth rank and achieving limitless potential. Some people would lose the possibility of reaching the heavens from the very start due to their past flaws and detours. The most pitiful of all would be the tremendous difference between an undead emperor and a myth-ranked undead emperor. However, the great majority of so-called level surpassers would only barely be able to reach the myth rank. They would be satisfied if they could reach the myth rank. It would be far too extravagant to begin with. Every myth-ranked weapon would be different. Everyone's path to becoming a level surpasser would be different as well. In that case, everyone's future paths would naturally be different as well. Before becoming a level surpasser, one could still rely on the experiences of their predecessors. They could also slowly imitate their predecessors' experiences. The path after becoming a level surpasser would be as wide as the ocean. There would be no guidance from seniors, nor would there be any restrictions from past experiences. There would be no restrictions at all. Being able to reach such a level would depend entirely on one's own abilities. Holy light formed a cycle between me and my holy light sword. A mysterious change was currently occurring. I felt an itch on my back. Suddenly, a pair of golden wings appeared on my back without any restrictions. Even though I hadn't transformed into a war angel yet, these wings had appeared on their own. Damn it, am I going to transform into a birdman? I was surprised, but my system gave me a timely message that helped me calm down. It turned out that from the very start, the so-called War Angel transformation, original Sin Demon transformation, had only been a part of my physical body's bloodline, just like how an angel's bloodline would come with wings. However, the power of my Arbiter bloodline was far too powerful. My physical body, which was far too weak, wasn't able to withstand it. My system had helped me separate my bloodline and turned it into a temporary transformation for me to use. But now that I had become a level surpasser, my bloodline power had stabilized. Naturally, I would need to return it to my physical body. I won't transform into a birdman, will I? However, I still had my doubts. I wouldn't be able to accept it if I really became a birdman. Do you really hate my angel creation so much? Relax, it's just like how a tiger won't reveal its claws for no reason. It's possible to hide all of your angel characteristics. It's just that you'll be able to obtain the additional power from transforming into an angel, and your physical appearance will change slightly. I heaved a sigh of relief when I heard that I wouldn't become a birdman, so I got rid of my resistance and allowed these changes to happen automatically. As holy light continuously flowed down my body, the originally hidden power of my bloodline was completely activated. Warmth flowed through my limbs and body, and I felt like my entire body was filled with endless power, yet I was unable to move. The power of my bloodline that came with my transformation ability was being broken down as a tremendous amount of order power was truly transforming my physical body. Angels were the most favored creatures of order by the goddess of order. The power of order that far surpassed that of seraphim allowed my physical body to become purer and purer. My arms were visibly becoming thicker, while the rocks under my feet were becoming smaller. There was only one possible explanation for such an abnormal transformation: my physical body was growing. Actually, even if you don't eat those fruits, you'll still be able to reach adulthood by now. Only now did I discover that this was probably a gift that my system had prepared long ago. However, it would only open up after I reached my current power level. The result of the foundational power of order entering my physical body was that my vessel was foundationally improving the quality of my physical body, establishing the best foundation for my future development. However, that wasn't what I was worried about. I won't become even bigger than a seraphim, will I? When I thought about how a high-level battle angel's true body would be even more ridiculous than a giant's, I trembled even more. I didn't want to be like Little Red, needing to use transformation magic to walk around in the mortal world. Stop wasting my breath. Don't worry about me. At the very least, my sense of beauty is better than Cynthia's. A bizarrely shaped demon flashed past my eyes, along with a rotten flesh incarnation. Stronger than Cynthia, this was truly a low standard. But soon, I didn't have the time to chat. I had reached a critical moment in my power level advancement. Now, I could only wait for the result. Judging from the holy light sword that was currently taking shape in the sky, the next time I woke up would be when I took that final step. Chapter 730. The white sword of light sliced through the air, leaving behind a trail of light and the smell of something being burned. The light swords danced in the air, and the afterimages filled the entire space. After destroying the ruins in front of me into rubble and leveling the rubble, I put away the bladeless sacred sword in my sleeve in satisfaction. That's right, my sleeve was more than enough to act as a scabbard. This sword truly only has a hilt. I nodded in confirmation at the silly cat's question. Previously, this sword didn't have a blade, not because it wasn't complete enough. It was because the design didn't have a blade to begin with. This was a sword of light that transcended time. May the force be with you. May the holy light be with you. The God of holy light is tricking, protecting you. Devout holy light believers made a gesture of prayer. Unfortunately, There were no comments, no praises, no appreciators. I refocused my attention on the sacred sword. The hilt was less than 30 centimeters long and was milky white like white jade. It felt warm to the touch, and there was an opening where the blade should have been. That was the opening for the blade of light. There were no unnecessary decorations, nor were there any tacky gems. The only decoration was a pattern of thorns and dragon scales, as well as a functional part to prevent the sword from slipping. As I willed it, holy light gathered on the hilt, forming a blade of light. I casually tossed out the sacred sword, and the blade danced in the air like a nimble swallow. Along its trajectory, 7 skeleton soldiers were killed one by one without leaving even a speck of ash behind. Buzz. When the sword returned to my hand, the cold and scorching blade of light was still humming, as if it wasn't satisfied with its harvest. I nodded in satisfaction. As a weapon, there was nothing to be picky about. Now, let's try the second mode. I reached for the dragon pattern on the hilt. There was a switch there to switch functions. Stop wasting time. We'll have plenty of time to play with it in the future. Help me protect it. The silly cat's words astonished me greatly. There were no enemies here, so why would she need my protection? The huge library that suddenly opened up and the magic books flying in the air explained everything. In the center of the temple, Harloise in her young girl form was smiling at me. You plan to advance at this time? Become an undead emperor? Nonsense. Help me guard it. Once I successfully advance, you'll have a thick thigh to cling to. After saying that, the silly cat started chanting, and the magic books around her became even more excited. Thus, after squatting for a week, I finally succeeded in my advancement. I could only continue squatting. It seemed like I would have to squat for a longer period of time this time. This was already the 2nd month since the outbreak of San Antonio's civil war, but the storm showed no signs of stopping. On the contrary, as the war progressed, it was obvious that it was getting more and more intense. As time passed, it became clear who was behind Duke Barot and who had the ability to temporarily form an alliance between the demons and humans. An old acquaintance, Sophocles the Deceiver. The Chaos Demon Monarch, who was fond of conspiracies and art, successfully fooled the world again with a simple and experienced method. Under the schemes of the 2 Chaos Overgods, Maria's death was not unjust at all. If one had to ask who was the unluckiest and most embarrassed party in this civil war, it would naturally be the Holy Church. Although Roland was also innocently implicated, he was far more fortunate than the Holy Church, which had lost so many soldiers and lost so much face. In normal situations, the Holy Church would never participate in a kingdom's civil war, especially a civil war between mega empires. San Antonio, which worshipped the god of Holy Light's teachings, should never participate. After all, the Holy Church was a religious faction, and San Antonio was the most common religious faction. No matter who won the civil war, it would be impossible for them to change their religious beliefs. San Antonio would still be the final victor. However, participating in another kingdom's civil war would not only make the other kingdoms look bad, but it would also be the first time that a divine authority would interfere with a major kingdom's royal authority. If the winner of the civil war wasn't San Antonio, the new victor would definitely have an extreme enmity with the Holy Church. San Antonio was the Holy Church's most loyal supporter. The Holy Church's reputation had already been greatly damaged, and they wouldn't be able to withstand such a huge loss. Unfortunately, this wasn't a normal time. The Holy Church had been forced to participate from the very start. The Holy Church spread the news that San Antonio's rightful successor, Queen Maria, was a chaos girl and naturally inclined towards the demons. They even provided sufficient evidence. The Holy Church's higher-ups saw that the situation wasn't right. San Antonio was a core territory that couldn't be lost. And so, the Pope and several archbishops were lured into participating. The Pope and the Holy Church's higher-ups were no idiots. It was the natural instinct of political creatures to bet on both sides. Although they accused Maria of being an enemy of the Holy Light, they didn't push things too far. They secretly sent out messengers to negotiate with Maria. The content of the negotiations was nothing more than if you send out a notice to cut off all ties with the Chaos Abyss and devoutly worship the Holy Light, the Holy Church will cancel all hostilities against you. And if the negotiations really went on, Maria, who didn't have much of a relationship with the Chaos faction to begin with, would indeed agree when considering that most of her subordinates and commoners worshipped the god of holy light. However, the problem was with the messengers. The messengers were real, and they even had a letter personally written by Pope Maria. However, by the time the furious commoners received the letter, the contents of the letter had changed from a sincere plea to surrender to the Holy Church's declaration of war against heretics. And then, the fire was lit, and the mastermind behind the scenes added more fuel to the fire. Sophocles the Deceiver was a veteran schemer and mastermind behind the scenes. Sophocles the Deceiver's history of scheming was even longer than the history of the Holy Light. Carwens was also personally carrying out this scheme. This was basically a trap for the Holy Church. Next, Duke Barot, who was under Sophocles' control to begin with, stood up and swore to take revenge on the Holy Church and Prince Winston, who were the assassins. That was only natural. From a certain standpoint, the Chaos faction's primary target had always been the Holy Church. Roland was the one who had been dragged into this. Originally, Cavendish had followed the unwritten rules of the Holy War and hadn't intended to personally take action. But now that he saw that his older brother was here, he was quite happy to personally take action and make trouble for his older brother, Roland. Looking at the big picture, it was only natural that they would make trouble for the Holy Church. After all, just like San Antonio, the Holy Church was the #1 enemy of the entire Chaos faction. Who else would they target but the Holy Church? Compared to the Mist Alliance that was stuck defending the Northlands, the Holy Church was still the #1 faction in the Order faction. Their tremendous number of Holy Light believers made the God of Holy Light nearly undefeatable. In that case, it was only natural that the God of Holy Light would lose some believers first. San Antonio was the Holy Church's right-hand man, as well as the Holy Church's core territory, so it was only natural that the Holy Church would kill them first. Two main god-level demon lords personally plotted against Maria. Even a true god would die. Maria's death wouldn't be unjust at all. And now, the Holy Church's status was becoming more and more awkward. Duke Barrett's subordinates viewed the Holy Church as the true culprit behind the Holy Church's death. The Holy Knight and Angel squadrons that the Holy Church had brought with them had originally been used to deal with the ogres and demons. But now, the Holy Church was forced into a meat-grinder-like civil war. After all, nobody was willing to just sit around and wait for death. Barrett's faction wanted to fight and become the sole ruler of this country. Winston's faction couldn't possibly just sit around and wait for death. If one side didn't intend to stop fighting, it was impossible for the civil war to stop. As the Holy Church's losses increased, both sides became truly angry. There was no victor in this civil war from the very start. War refugees, deserters, adventurers, and so on. Every day, countless people would flee from the battlefield. There would be countless refugees on the roads. And as the civil war continued, the Holy Church's attacks on other humans were exaggerated and spread to every corner of the world. Of course, the Holy Church's image as a guardian of humanity was severely damaged. This had originally been the Holy Church's trump card for being undefeatable. The Southern sect and many other opposing factions wouldn't miss out on this opportunity. All sorts of attacks on the Holy Church never stopped. Plus, the Holy Church's reputation was rapidly decreasing every day. Finally, two true gods of the Holy Church appeared on the battlefield. The heartless true gods had given mortals the fate of death, but it was impossible for the Holy Church to recover their reputation. Everyone knew that the Holy Church should retreat now. However, this would mean that they had completely given up on San Antonio. Not only that, the other Holy Churches would also be disappointed in San Antonio. Pope Coloma still couldn't make a decision. Yet, at the edge of the battlefield, another passerby appeared. Behind the black cape was a little girl who wasn't even 10 years old. They had come here from a meat-grinder-like battlefield without a single drop of blood on them. Harlois, how does it feel to become an undead emperor? It sucks. I've never felt like the journey was so long before. The little girl seemed to be having quite a hard time keeping up with me. I wanted to help her stay on my head like before, but she wasn't willing. She shrugged, and I didn't insist. Unlike me, who had long since experienced leveling up, Harloy's had quite a large barrier to overcome. She failed several times, and it took her almost 2 months before she finally succeeded. Another small problem was that after her physical body evolved, although she still had the ability to transform into clones and could even strengthen herself, her true body would have to remain in its original form. From a certain standpoint, this was another special characteristic of becoming a semigod. While becoming undying, one's physical body's appearance, size, and age would also be fixed. Harloy's had quite a few stashes. Her lace princess dress looked quite cute, but she always tripped when walking. Since she didn't use any magic to strengthen her physical body, she was just like a pitiful little girl. Currently, Harloy's was panting heavily. I didn't see any thick thighs, but her increasingly short legs were quite vexing for her. Even though it was quite nice to lie on my head, for some reason, she refused to use her original method of traveling. In that case, our originally slow journey naturally became even slower. "You've taken so long. Is everything all right in the Northlands?" No. Winter's already over, and everyone's busy with spring plowing. The new seeds seem to be quite good. Another benefit of bringing Harloy's along was that her clones were the best communication devices. She had never stopped receiving information from the Northlands. Previously, there was a limit to the distance between her clones and the Northlands. It would seem that this was the result of her recent breakthrough. I felt slightly more reassured after hearing the Northlands' reports. San Antonio, in the southwest, was in complete chaos. However, the Northlands' situation was surprisingly good. The Holy Church's attention and strength was focused on the Northlands' situation, so they naturally didn't have much time to worry about the Northlands' situation. Instead, they should be worried about the Mist Alliance's revenge. The overall situation wasn't good, so the Holy Church's Divine Alliance had temporarily stopped all activities. From a certain standpoint, the Holy Church still owed me. It was as if I had been ambushed yesterday, and I hadn't taken revenge yet. Logically speaking, I should have just assassinated 1 or 2 of the Holy Church's higher-ups for fun. At the very least, that would give them a warning that they would have to pay a price if they dared to touch me. But looking at the current situation, taking revenge on the Holy Church would be equivalent to helping the Chaos faction. It wasn't my style to not take revenge. However, taking revenge would be helping the enemy, which made me feel rather conflicted. I had been rather hesitant over the past few days. In the end, I decided to note down this debt and not take revenge for the time being. "You don't intend to go have some fun?" Harloy's was quite free. She actually seemed more human now that she had reached semigod rank. The death of the elven gods also represented the end of her hatred. As long as the Mist Alliance didn't collapse and the Elven Empire developed well, she indeed had the right to be free. Harloy's no longer had any goals to pursue. She didn't feel any psychological pressure at all. She could even enjoy delicious food and beautiful scenery on the battlefield. It was as if she were on vacation every day. However, there were some things that were correct. After Harloy's successfully broke through to become an undead emperor, she instantly became incredibly powerful. It would definitely be worth it for her to have such a binding equipment. I glanced at the main battlefield in the distance. The pointer of my magic compass was already pointing towards the sky. This meant that the magic power of both sides involved in this battle was off the charts. Even the true gods are getting serious. It's highly likely that they'll self-destruct if they lose. I don't want to get involved. I shook my head and rejected this rather tempting suggestion. Right now, San Antonio was the focal point of many dimensions. Unlike before, it was possible that all the powerful existences would personally participate in this battle. No matter if it was demon waves, angel waves, human wave tactics, true gods, demons, or semigods self-destructing, or all sorts of forbidden spells, and combination magic, they were all incredibly dangerous. It would be truly embarrassing if I was mysteriously killed by them. Fundamentally speaking, this was already the frontline battlefield in the mortal plane. I didn't have the urge to die so easily just by myself and a cat, a young girl. They have their own internal battles. We have our own matters as well. The Chaos Girls definitely won't be easy to deal with. There's also Cavendish and Eliza. Then shall we return to the Northlands? Or to Bardi? To the Mage Country. But before we leave, I need to talk to someone. Who? Prince Winston? No, there's no meaning in talking to him anymore. He's been riding a tiger for a long time now. He'll have no choice but to accept this battle even if he doesn't want to. His own subjective thoughts won't matter at all. I want to talk to Pope Coloma. Chapter 731. Popes and what not were the most annoying. What I meant was that from the very start, the Holy Church had always been a potential competitor for us. And as the God of Holy Light's follower, Pope Coloma, who had the most authority and prestige in the entire world, had always been a wall that we couldn't get around. I had once thought about how wonderful it would be if some assassin got lucky and took advantage of Coloma, or if Coloma got choked on a walnut biscuit one day and couldn't catch his breath before dying. But some things only needed to be thought about. Since Coloma was able to stand at the very top of the Holy Church, which was a gathering of heroes, he was impeccable in both power level and intelligence. Many popes in the past had died of old age, but very few had died in battle. Being able to sit in Coloma's position meant that he had the strongest combat strength in the entire mortal plane. Although all the popes in the past looked old and decrepit, on average, they had been in power for more than 170 years. The current pope had only been in power for about 10 years. Even if all the cardinals died, Coloma might not necessarily die. When Coloma was still a cardinal, he had already killed the god of waves. Now that he had inherited Pope Coloma's power, he would definitely be one of the strongest individuals in the world. But now, I felt rather happy as I looked at the trembling old man in front of me. Hey, old man, you're not dead yet. Although Coloma still had the same face as before, his complexion was much worse than before. First, he had a kind appearance and a bottomless abyss. Now, he was giving off an astonishing pressure. However, I found it rather amusing. That was because only an old lion king whose authority was being challenged would have to bare his fangs and claws all day long to show off his existence. I laughed in Schadenfreude, not hiding my delight at all. Roland. 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 His squinted eyes suddenly widened, filled with astonishment and disbelief. What followed next was undisguised hostility. Yep, it's me. You didn't recognize me? That's right, I'm already a level 4 individual. Without all of you pressuring me, there's no need for me to be in such a hurry to take this final step. I looked at the little old man in front of me with evil intentions. 2 months ago, he had been as steady as a mountain. Now, he was like a startled bird. Judging from his wrinkles and tired expression, he seemed to have aged more than 10 years in the few months that I hadn't seen him. What could be happier than making great progress? Naturally, it was discovering that the opponent had taken a big step back after making great progress. For those who cultivated divine arts, their mental state was more important than anything else. A firm will was the most important attribute for divine arts job class members. Wavering in their confidence and falling in their souls were the greatest sins. Powerful priests and archbishops were all much more patient than the last. Pope Coloma's mental state was clearly out of balance. His lifespan would definitely be shortened, and it was likely that his power level would greatly decrease. Why aren't you dead yet? If you're dead, we can save a lot of trouble. Heresy. The Pope's guards roared in anger, and the most impulsive one had already drawn his sword and rushed over. Then, with a flash of black shadow and a gust of black wind, the warrior disappeared without a trace. His angry roar still echoed in the air, but his figure had disappeared. This strange scene made the guards stop in their tracks, consciously standing in front of the Pope to protect him. I didn't want to explain. I took out my nail clippers and started to cut my nails. I didn't even look at them. The room was silent for a while. You're not here to watch the show, are you? That's right, of course I wasn't here to watch the show. I had a lot of things to do, and I didn't have the free time to watch someone else's show. The Pope also knew that if I had come with enmity, he wouldn't have wasted any words and would have immediately attacked me. And since I wasn't going to say anything nice, I was here to discuss something with sincerity. Still, if someone intended to attack me with a sword, I wouldn't mind collecting some interest first. I continued to remain silent as I patiently cut my nails, which were growing longer and longer. I had indeed been neglectful as I had been busy traveling. After a long period of silence, I finally spoke up. I'm here representing the Mist Alliance and the Southern Sect to re-establish a new alliance with you. Are you happy? I'm here to help you. If I had to discuss who had the deepest grudge against the Holy Church, I would definitely be at the top. If I had to discuss who wanted the Holy Church destroyed the most in the mortal plane, I would definitely be at the top as well. My own grudge, the Mist Kingdom's grudge, Estrada's grudge, the Northern Mist Tribe's grievances over the past few years, as well as the recent infighting in the open and in the dark. I had just been ambushed and killed not long ago. I really wanted the Holy Church to be destroyed as quickly as possible. But in the context of the entire world, it definitely wouldn't be a good thing for the Holy Church to be destroyed so quickly. Even if the sky collapsed, the tallest person would hold it up. Right now, the tallest person was doubtlessly the Holy Church. It was inevitable that the Chaos faction would relentlessly attack the Holy Church. If they didn't make trouble for the Holy Church, they would naturally make trouble for other countries and organizations. The current situation was doubtlessly a trap for the Holy Church. If the Holy Church continued to get involved in this internal conflict, not only would their reputation be damaged, the Holy Church would also continuously send reinforcements to the Holy Church, which would be a huge drain on their strength. If the Holy Church abandoned San Antonio, their reputation would also be damaged and they would lose a lot of blood. Normally, I would be in a good mood if I didn't stab them in the back, not to mention helping them. But now, the Holy War had only been going on for a short 10 years. The Holy Church had fallen rather quickly. In the game's history, the Holy Church had also lasted for nearly 200 years before it completely disappeared. Even though the Holy Church's bishops and priests had all sorts of squandering methods, they had still been squandering for many years due to how rich they were. It wasn't like the current situation where the entire Holy Church had fallen into danger so quickly. From my conclusion, it was doubtlessly that I had been constantly trying to steal the Holy Church's resources, causing them to fall into a disadvantage from the very start. After losing the support of all the human factions, the Holy Church in the game's history naturally appeared to be strong on the outside but weak on the inside. The Holy Church could fall. In fact, I even hoped that they would fall. The God of Holy Light should fall. I cursed him to fall as soon as possible, but this definitely wouldn't happen within the next 20 years. After some calculations, I knew what would happen if the Holy Church fell. From an ordinary citizen's perspective, it would be as if the sky had collapsed and they would lose their faith in the Holy War. This would be a chain reaction that would cause them to lose confidence in the overall victory of the Holy War. Confidence and morale were things that didn't really exist, but they truly affected the war situation everywhere. A fallen flag could be raised again, but if it fell so quickly, it was unknown if the Chaos faction would even give us enough time to raise it again. In my timeline, the Holy Church should have slowly declined to the point of death. During this process, the new generation of heroes and gods would gradually establish new factions and organizations. Numerous flags would be erected all over the world, and it wouldn't be a big deal if the Holy Church's flag were to fall. And from a high-level combat strength perspective, the Holy Light's faith would suffer a major blow. The number of believers would greatly decrease, and the already weakened God of Holy Light would be greatly weakened. He would no longer be undefeatable. That would be a truly hilarious situation. In that case, all the Chaos main gods and demon lords would lose their restraints and unhesitatingly enter the mortal plane. Who would be responsible for dealing with all the Chaos main gods? Right now, there was a subtle balance between the Chaos main gods and the demon lords. As the strongest existence in the world, the God of Holy Light had far too much influence. Once the God of Holy Light was weakened, the so-called unspoken rules among the gods would naturally vanish without a trace. All the Chaos main gods would personally appear, and the Holy War would progress much faster. Although this would happen sooner or later, it would have to wait until the seeds of the Holy War sprouted. Many new outstanding individuals had already appeared in various places during the Holy War. However, it was still far from them being able to take charge. The new generation of Valkyries' reincarnations were only 10 years old. Once they reached adulthood, they would greatly improve the overall situation of the Holy War. From the Mist Alliance's perspective, the Holy Church's collapse wasn't a good thing. That was because the Holy Church's meat shield was now gone. Everyone could see that the Mist Alliance was in an excellent situation. In that case, the demons could also see that. Compared to other large trees that would be difficult to shake, the Chaos Main gods would naturally first trample on the Holy Church's well-developed little sprout. New technological revolutions were currently occurring. New technologies were appearing every day. The longer this war dragged on, the stronger the vitality of the Holy Church would be. That was why the Holy Church absolutely couldn't collapse at this critical juncture. I felt helpless. Even though I felt helpless, even though I was filled with resentment, I could only mutter about how I'm only doing this for myself in order to continue the Holy Church's growth. Of course, I wouldn't tell them the truth. In terms of face, I was only here as a former ally of the Mist Alliance to exchange for a new alliance. An alliance between the Mist Alliance and the Southern Sect. That's indeed quite attractive at this juncture. Then, what's the price? Pope Igor reached out his hand while leaning on his walking stick. He asked me what the price would be. All of it. Of course there's a price for this. You'll all be worried if I don't take advantage of the situation. Relax, I want a lot. Since I was already here, how could I possibly be satisfied if I didn't take advantage of the situation? More than 2 hours later, I left with several scrolls in satisfaction. Pope Igor and cardinals were left behind in the conference room with ashen expressions. What did I want? First, I wanted the entire Northlands Holy Battlefront Alliance. The Holy Church didn't have time to worry about the Northlands anyways. I didn't make any excessive demands that the Northlands Holy Battlefront Alliance join the Mist Alliance. I only requested that the Northlands Holy Church countries stop being enemies with the Mist Alliance and forbid them from supervising and controlling the Mist Alliance's resources. I also requested that the Holy Church's main headquarters withdraw from the Northlands. This was something that the Holy Church could accept. That was because the Holy Church didn't have much territory in the Northlands to begin with. The Northlands Holy Battlefront Alliance had also caused a lot of controversy within the Holy Church. The Holy Church had to invest a lot of resources in the Northlands without any direct connection to the Northlands Holy Battlefront Alliance. Now that the situation in Ike was worsening, it would seem foolish to invest resources in the Northlands, which had no direct connection to the Northlands. And once the new alliance was established, the Northlands Holy Battlefront Alliance would seem even more meaningless and wasteful. What would the Mist Alliance gain from this alliance? I could only say that it would be countless. Secondly, I requested that the Southern Sect's teaching of pure holy light be recognized as the orthodox teaching of holy light, and that Estrada be honored as a martyr and a holy disciple. Even though this was just something that I wanted to say, the entire conference room fell silent for a full 5 minutes when I said this. All the cardinals looked at me as if they wanted to eat me alive. The Holy Church was a religious organization, not a political organization. Disagreements with the Holy Church's teachings would be the most important thing for the Holy Church. Even if the entire Holy Church was destroyed, the Holy Church's teachings wouldn't be changed. If the Southern Sect's teachings, which didn't worship the God of Holy Light, were orthodox, then what was the God of Holy Light? What was the Holy Church, which worshipped the God of Holy Light as the highest God? This was something that the Southern Sect wouldn't agree to even if the entire Holy Church was destroyed. But since the Southern Sect wanted to form an alliance with the Southern Sect, they would at least need to silently acknowledge the Southern Sect's legitimacy. From a certain standpoint, this would be acknowledging the Southern Sect's existence. It would have been fine to silently acknowledge the Southern Sect's legitimacy, yet I just had to bring it up. This would be the height of stupidity when it came to diplomacy. However, I was incredibly delighted to see all the Southern Sect's elders' faces flushed red with anger, as well as the unlucky ones who were angered to the point of having their hearts beat erratically because of their holy light. I knew that it would be impossible for the Southern Sect to agree to my proposal of acknowledging the Southern Sect's legitimacy. That was only to disgust them. However, not only was my request disgusting, it was also filled with evil intentions. With Estrada's reputation and past achievements, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him a martyr or a holy disciple. In fact, such a saying had even been spread among the Holy Church factions. But in the end, everyone tacitly forgot about this old knight who had dedicated his entire life to the holy light. The reason? The one who killed Estrada was the god of holy light's incarnation, the god of holy light's will. In that case, why did the god of holy light confer the title of martyr and holy disciple on Estrada? Previously, when I said acknowledging the southern sect's legitimacy, the southern sect's elders were only angry to the point of stomping their feet. Not only that, their hearts couldn't take it anymore, so they kept buffing themselves with holy light. When I asked for Estrada to be conferred the title of holy light, 2 of them even collapsed while clutching their chests. It was almost possible to see an old man performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Even with such a situation occurring, I could still see the holy knight and priest representatives eagerly wanting to speak up. But in the end, after exchanging glances with each other, they all maintained a unified silence with complex expressions. In another 100 years, Estrada would probably become the Holy Church's greatest dark history. But right now, Estrada's disciples, students, and benefactors could be found in every corner of the Holy Church. There were plenty of low-level holy knight and priests who secretly sympathized with the pure holy light martyrs. There were also plenty of low-level holy knights who felt that the god of holy light had gone too far, which was why their faith in him had wavered. This was why there were voices within the Holy Church that spoke up against Estrada. I believed that after I left, the Southern sect and the Holy Church would maintain a certain amount of distance and peace between each other. The voices calling out for Estrada's innocence would only grow louder and louder. In that case, as time passed, the foundational beliefs of the Holy Church would be shaken. I'm Estrada's disciple, as well as the strongest holy light knight in the world. I've even inherited the hammer of holy light and the path of protection. Isn't it normal for me to call out for my teacher's innocence? My words were quite simple, direct, and sincere. They were all the truth that came from the bottom of my heart. The moment I said this, the holy light sword at my waist became the center of attention in the entire conference room. After confirming that I had indeed broken through to semigod due to the concept of holy light, the other holy knight and holy light priests obviously looked at me in a different light. They were still on guard, but there was now more respect and understanding. The successor of the Hammer of Holy Light had always been the Holy Knight's spiritual leader in name and in reality. My status was indeed quite awkward, but as a mature Holy Knight, they would at least show me friendliness and basic etiquette. In the end, we stopped talking about this topic. After all, the God of Holy Light was an existence that we couldn't avoid. If we continued talking about this, it would likely lead to a religious war. Today, we were here to sign an alliance. All right, I understand your difficulties. In that case, at the very least, you can cancel the ban on Estrada. This isn't something that the God of Holy Light ordered you to do. Estrada has served the Holy Church for his entire life. At the very least, the younger generations should know who he is. This request isn't too much at all. All the Holy Knight and priests around me nodded silently. Seeing this situation, Pope Coloma sighed and finally made a compromise. Although the Holy Church didn't agree to make me a Holy Light saint or recognize me as the Orthodox Holy Church, they also made a compromise. Maintaining peace with the Southern sect in private was a part of the alliance, and private discussion of Estrada and how to commemorate Estrada was now forbidden. However, these were only the least controversial and most acceptable parts of this alliance that was destined to be recorded in history. In the 10th year of the Dawn calendar, the Holy Church signed a secret alliance with the Southern sect and the Mist Alliance, reaching an agreement that was known in history as the Betrayers' Alliance. From then on, the Holy Church, which had been so powerful for so long, began to decline. I like this way of saying it. Let's record it down in our notebook. Chapter 732. Previously, they had only discussed the additional terms of the alliance. The core of the alliance was still the Southern sect, the Mist Alliance, and the Holy Church coming to an agreement in private. This was no small matter. If word of this got out, it would probably be even more important than the news of a god's death or San Antonio's death. Critics and strategists would definitely discuss and research it for half a year. The Southern sect wasn't just a simple holy church. Its influence had spread to every corner of Asia. Compared to the Holy Church, the Southern sect's teachings were simpler and more approachable. It was a true miracle of holy light. Most importantly, it wasn't as domineering as the Holy Church, which allowed it to gradually replace the original Holy Church's faith in remote areas. Together with the Holy Church, the Southern sect still occupied more than 70% of the human world's faith. Behind the Southern sect was the mega empire Bardi. When considering the mage country's relationship with the Southern sect was a gigantic Southern alliance. As for the Mist Alliance, there was no need to mention it. Its physical existence occupied the entire Northlands. The elves, beastmen, humans, and undead. Although their main faith wasn't the holy light, their influence in human society was still astonishing. Behind the Mist Alliance was the Gods of Hades. This was a mega faction capable of rivaling the entire Order faction. Nobody knew what else was behind the Mist Alliance. Between the three factions, there were faint signs of hostility. They were always on guard against each other and secretly hooked up with each other. Many people in the Holy Church viewed the Mist Alliance and the Southern sect as their number one enemy. They were even more threatening than the Chaos faction. After all, the Holy Church had a life-and-death relationship with the Chaos faction. However, the Southern sect and the Mist Alliance had a strange relationship where the Holy Church had finally defeated their mortal enemies with great difficulty, only to have the Mist Alliance and the Southern sect reap the rewards. What did this alliance mean to the Holy Church? What could the Holy Church obtain from this alliance? This wasn't written in the alliance. In fact, only the benefits were tangible. In that case, was the Holy Church an idiot? No, that wasn't it. The Holy Church could obtain tremendous benefits from this alliance, but those benefits couldn't be written into the alliance because they were far too despicable and shameless. If the three factions reach an alliance, that means that all of human society recognizes the Holy Church as the leader of the Holy Church in the Holy War. At the very least, on the surface, the Southern sect and Northern Mist Alliance won't openly challenge the Holy Church's authority. In that case, the Holy Church will be able to use their military forces to guard against the Southern sect and Northern Mist Alliance. Not only that, they'll be able to do something immoral. Yes, that was a major matter. It was a betrayal of all of San Antonio. Before the Holy Church reached an agreement with the two major factions, as long as the Holy Church abandoned San Antonio and voluntarily withdrew from the internal war, all the kingdoms and factions would pursue the Holy Church to the bitter end, challenging their right to lead the Holy War. You can even abandon the most loyal San Antonio, and you still expect others to trust you. Who knows if the next ally you'll betray will be us? In this world, the rule of the Holy Light Church wasn't a royal power, it relied on authority. Damage to reputation and credibility wasn't just empty words, the loss was irreparable. But, if the three major factions reached an agreement in private right now to betray and abandon San Antonio, that would be a decision made by all of human society, or at least the vast majority of human factions. This wasn't just a matter of not looking into it. Only San Antonio's interests would be harmed in this situation. This was also the foundational reason why I called this alliance the Traitors' Alliance. There was no saving San Antonio anymore, so let's give up on it. Anyone who said such a thing, even if it was the truth, would definitely be forever shamed by history. Of course, the Holy Church would be the ones to make such a decision, and the Holy Church would be the ones to be despised in the end. But, at least for now, all of human society would tacitly allow this to happen and treat it as dark history, so that they wouldn't attack the Holy Church. This was the true content of the alliance. Both sides knew about this, but neither side would say it out loud. However, the Holy Church would definitely do such a thing after obtaining the alliance. Although the Holy Church would suffer heavy losses, it would still be better than constantly losing blood in this bottomless pit, as well as losing reputation by slaughtering their own kind. Betrayal? Yes, this was betrayal. This was a ticking time bomb. The people of San Antonio would forever remember this day. All the lucky survivors would view the Holy Church as their mortal enemy. Their hatred for the Holy Church would be even greater than the Chaos Abyss demons and great demons that were currently destroying San Antonio's land. Of course, the prerequisite was that San Antonio would survive this calamity. Meanwhile, we would have the crucial time to prepare for war. San Antonio would forever be the human race's most powerful country. San Antonio had plenty of resources, enough to last them for several decades. No matter who the final victor of this civil war was, no matter who the final ruler was, they wouldn't allow their country to be filled with demons and great demons. This was how countries interacted with each other. Only benefits would be discussed, not emotions. It would always be better for another country to be unlucky than for their own country to be unlucky. Not only that, we weren't the traitors. We were only bystanders. In fact, we even generously helped the Holy Church out, so the Holy Church should be grateful to us. Grateful to you? Just this incident alone has caused Coloma to be forever shamed by history. Right now, he probably wants nothing more than to eat you alive, yet he still has to smile at you and forget about all the previous disagreements. Today is probably the most sullen moment of his entire life. The silly cat, the damned young girl's comments were as sharp as ever. And judging from Coloma's twisted expression, this was indeed the case. We tacitly agreed to forget about all the previous disagreements. We treated the Seraphim's death as if it had never happened. This was probably the boring tacit agreement between politicians. Of course, how long this alliance would last would depend on which side gained the upper hand first. Only when there were sufficient benefits would this alliance become meaningless. But since there were mutual benefits, this alliance would be incredibly solid. Actually, this was the same for all international alliances and agreements. Without a powerful arbitration organization and the ability to enforce them, the violator would have nothing to fear. These so-called alliances and agreements could only be maintained by mutual benefits. The moment that there were no mutual benefits, they would naturally become nothing more than scrap paper. I left by myself with the useless papers from the alliance. The moment I left, I immediately boarded an airship heading northeast. I didn't intend to experience the feeling of being surrounded and killed again. There were still many people in the Holy Church who wanted me dead. Both sides of today's secret alliance would likely have their reputations tarnished afterwards. However, I didn't really care. After all, my reputation was already tarnished enough. It would be a good thing for the Holy Church to be tarnished even more. The only one who would lose out from this was the third party, San Antonio. However, the strategic space and time gained from this alliance would be beneficial to the entire world. That was why both sides had tacitly agreed to betray this third party. I disguised myself as an elderly man with a cane and sat on the edge of the airship. I couldn't help but sigh as I looked at the prosperous streets below. How many people know that their own country, the strongest country in the entire continent, San Antonio, has already been destroyed? Chapter 733. It had already been half a month since the Shadow Alliance was signed. Many things had changed, but many things were still the same as before. 3 days after signing the Shadow Alliance, not only did the Holy Church not send any new reinforcements, some Knight squadrons and Angel squadrons that had suffered heavy losses were already retreating from San Antonio. It seemed that the Holy Church had reached some sort of secret agreement with Duke Barot. The Holy Church's forces retreated quite smoothly. The Holy Church's enemies simply watched as the Holy Church's forces retreated from the battlefield. And this was only the beginning. The Holy Church's forces began retreating from every battlefield, with the most elite Angel squadrons retreating the fastest. If this continued, San Antonio would soon be the only ones left on the battlefield to fight their own civil war. The Holy Church had given up on Prince Winston? Had they given up on San Antonio? All sorts of news and rumors were spreading everywhere. Pope Coloma made an announcement, saying a bunch of nonsense like the Holy Church will forever protect San Antonio and the God of Holy Light is watching over the land of Holy Light in order to appease the public. Of course, the government's words were always so heartwarming. At the very least, Pope Coloma's reputation as the representative of the Holy Light in the mortal world was quite high. Devout believers would still trust him. As for what happened afterwards, when the civil war reached the point where only one side could survive, the survivors wouldn't care about what Coloma had said before. And that would no longer have anything to do with me. The popularity of magical engineering technology greatly reduced the distance between countries. Although airship tickets for cargo and passengers were quite expensive and limited to only a few major cities, My starting point and destination were both the capitals of powerful countries in the continent. It would be quite worth it to take a comfortable and safe airship. But as the war progressed, this new transportation route also met with a new threat. Along the way, our airship met more than 10 waves of flying magical beasts, a passing green dragon, and more than 10 aerial night squadrons. The green dragon and magical beasts were searching for food, while the aerial night squadrons were patrolling the countries along the way. The current world was far from peaceful, so the aerial night squadrons would keep an eye on every aerial target that passed by. But in the end, the magical beasts were driven away by the magic cannons. The green dragon and the aerial night squadrons followed us for a while before finally turning around and leaving. The close to 100 medium-sized magic crystal cannons on the giant floating ship were one reason, but the main reason was because of the chess pieces hanging on the ship. Bardi's Dragon Head flag, the Mist Alliance's Stormwind Castle, the Ottoman Empire's crowned flag, and the fairy's listener symbol were the chess pieces hanging on the bow of this passenger airship. This represented that this tiny passenger airship was backed by 4 major organizations. The reason was simple. Only the Mist Alliance and Ottoman Empire possessed the technology to construct large airships capable of transporting goods and passengers across international borders. Neither of the Mist Alliance nor Ottoman Empire would miss out on such an excellent business opportunity. The vicious competition between the two factions had finally transformed into a cooperative monopoly. Not only would Bardi be able to keep up appearances, there would also be an additional reason. The fairies had also been invited to become a shareholder of Bardi. Their intelligence and organizational abilities would be far too useful in the transportation industry. The neutral Mist Alliance would be able to organize the transportation of goods and passengers. This would also allow the participating countries to lower their guard. At the very least, it would be far more reassuring than the gigantic organizations like Bardi and the Mist Alliance. In this generation, aviation laws didn't exist at all. The concept of sea routes had only just been introduced. The sailors and captains of the airships were all highly experienced seafarers. Even the tools used to determine the direction and coordinates of the airships were the same ones used on the sea. It would be quite common for the airships to accidentally deviate from the sea route. This wouldn't be a big deal at sea, as the airships would simply turn around and return to their original location. But in a continent with no ruler, it would be a huge problem for an airship to trespass into another country's territory. Not only that, it would be an armed airship trespass, which might even cause a war. That was why we often saw aerial night squadrons following us. Perhaps it was because the Mist Alliance, Bardi, and Ottoman Empire's flags were sturdy enough, or perhaps these countries were already used to it. Most of the time, the aerial night squadrons would only follow us for a while and watch us leave the airship. There were other situations as well. Sometimes, the aerial night squadrons would board the airship of their own volition. Although this was more or less a form of supervision, it was also common to hear the night squadrons chat about their country's customs and customs. Some of the more cheerful ones would even perform for their guests. There was a dark-skinned scorpion knight who was also an excellent dancer. Her desert-style dance left a deep impression on me. This happened several times on the airship. Not only did the aerial night squadrons ease the tension of the passengers, it also made us look forward to the rest of the journey. Of course, judging from how the aerial night squadrons skillfully accepted red packets from the airship crew when they left, it was likely that they already had a contract with the Mist Alliance. Or perhaps they were simply there to appease their guests. At the very least, it seemed that long-distance passenger transportation between countries was a highly profitable business. I did a quick calculation. This airship would leave every 3 days, and there would be 300 to 400 passengers on board. There were several different grades of airship tickets, but the cheapest one would cost more than 2,000 gold coins. A VIP ticket would cost 10,000 gold coins each, which would be enough to buy a decent manor in the capital. Only major merchants or major nobles would be able to afford such a ticket. If nothing unexpected happened, they would probably be able to earn several million gold coins. This would be even more profitable than robbing a bank. However, it seemed that the expenses were quite high. Not to mention the depreciation of the airship, the world wasn't safe, and the magic crystal cannons and the permanent bodyguards on the airship were quite expensive. Over the past few days, I had seen 2 legends and 1 saint youngster. They were all wearing the armband of a public security officer, so they were probably the airship's bodyguards. However, when considering the current chaotic situation in Ike, perhaps this was already quite a good deal. The road tolls and checkpoints were quite disgusting. Some areas were battlefields, and forcefully passing through would be no different from suicide. Traveling on the air would be much less troublesome than traveling on land. After all, compared to flying magical beasts, deserters and bandits were far more dangerous. At the very least, it seemed that these airships had several major countries' flags, so the airships were 100% safe. The passengers were quite confident in their safety. This confidence had been tossed aside when the Green Dragon attacked, but reached its peak when the Green Dragon finally chose to leave. As expected of the Mist Alliance. Even the dragons don't dare to touch their airship. It should be the Bardi Empire. Our country's Dragon Knight Squadron is famous all over the world. That dragon must be afraid of being hunted down by our country's Dragon Knight Squadron. Although that Bardi citizen's words caused all the Bardi citizens present to feel proud, I almost laughed out loud. After all, I understood the dragon language. Damn it, a flying metal can. I heard that meeting one will bring good luck. Metal can, please bless Natasha with accepting my love. Please bless me with many treasures. Please bless me with... That dragon's frightening roar was actually based on the newest rumor among the dragons. He prayed that he would meet with good luck, and that he would leave in the end. This wasn't a decision made after weighing the pros and cons, but rather because he was satisfied with his wish. However, there were some things that these customers weren't wrong. Considering the special relationship between Bardi and the dragons, any domestic dragon that was connected to Dragon City wouldn't attack Bardi's airships. In fact, that rumor had been spread by Dragon City, which supported Bardi, and Little Red's Dragon City. There was also a part of the rumor that attacking an airship would bring bad luck. However, this was also the truth. Dragon City would receive a share of this business as well. Attacking an airship would be the equivalent of cutting off the Dragon Queen and Dragon King's source of income. It would be strange if the wild dragons didn't suffer. This was another reason why Bardi had been dragged into this business. Of course, there was no such thing as absolute safety in this world. As the war progressed, accidents would occur sooner or later. Not everyone would be able to communicate with each other, such as running into a squadron of flying demons. However, as the war progressed, land travel would become even more difficult and dangerous. This business would always have potential. Having a secret agreement with the Holy Church also meant that this business could reach the Holy Church's sphere of influence. This would be a tremendous source of income. More income also meant more ammunition and food, which meant that the Mist Alliance's national power was growing by the day. Perhaps we were the most suited to the environment of the Holy War. There's a group of flying demons in front of us. Succubi and four-winged berserk demons. Warnings sounded in my ears as the sailors hurriedly urged the passengers on the deck to take shelter in the cabin. Meanwhile, Harlois shot me a dissatisfied expression. You can blame me for this. Isn't this normal? The demon wave has ended, and the Chaos Abyss has entered an active period. There are countless Chaos Abyss gates now. We've encountered demon armies, demon lords, and so on. Old man over there, little girl, hurry and take shelter. Grandmaster Rakeage, please attack. The magical radar has detected that a demon lord has appeared. Alright then, I decided to shut up.